Dear Naruto Lemon fans, I'm thrilled to invite all of you to my Boosty channel, where you can enjoy exclusive Naruto Lemon scenes in a comfortable and supportive community. Choose from various subscription tiers, from Mini Lemon to God Lemon, and gain access to unique content tailored just for our fans. Plus, subscribers to over Naruto Lemon and God Lemon will receive special mentions in my videos. Support my channel and dive deeper into the world of Naruto today. Dare. Uzumaki Kushina is a terrible mother. It's not something I like to admit. I like to pretend she's an incredible mother, that she pays more than just few minutes of attention to me a day, that she doesn't leave the house early in the afternoon each day, and only come back far past midnight, reeking of sweat and alcohol. That she doesn't forget that children need to be nurtured with love and affection, and fed several meals a day, not just the occasional fruit or sweet to snack on when the thought crosses her mind. Most children, anyway. It's not something I like to admit, but it doesn't make it any less true. Maybe in some other world, Uzumaki Kushina is a wonderful mother who lovingly dotes on her daughter, granting her whatever her heart desires. But this is not that world, and such trivial thoughts are useless. In this world, the one that matters, Uzumaki Kushina is a sad and broken woman, not even a hint of the proud and indomitable kunoichi that everybody tells me she used to be. But I still love her. With all of my being. I shouldn't. I know that. She doesn't deserve it. I had to grow up far too quickly under her care than any other child. I had to teach myself to cook so we wouldn't starve, keep that house clean so we wouldn't be buried under various trash and bottles of alcohol. Not to mention I had to fend for myself when it came to the irrational hatred the village had for me. Just the fact that I was capable of acknowledging this spoke volumes. No, Uzumaki Kushina could barely be described as a caretaker, let alone a mother. I knew that. I think she knew it, too. She blamed me for Minato's death, I think. And I think she hated herself for blaming me, and she hated Minato for dying to seal the fox inside me, and the third for not taking his place, and Jiraiya, and for not being there to help when the fox escaped, and the village for not being strong enough to repel the fox without the fourth, and the fox for just existing in the first place. Her life was a vicious cycle of hatred and self-loathing that left her barely able to function, let alone care for her 5-year-old daughter. But that didn't stop me from smiling uncontrollably whenever she entered the room, grinning like a loon whenever she spoke more than a word or two to me, or staring longingly at her gorgeous red locks and mesmerizing violet eyes, aching for a touch, to hold her hand, to be wrapped in her embrace. I loved her desperately, and I wanted nothing more than to see her out of this depressive hole she was in, to see her smile and laugh like she did when Minato was still alive. To see her happy. Minato. The fourth Hokage. I didn't know how to feel about him. On one hand, he was my father, and probably a pretty great guy if his death sent Mom into her funk and the village to their unrestrained hatred of me, but on the other hand, his death was exactly the reason Mom was the way she was. And it wasn't an unavoidable death either. He sacrificed himself to seal the fox in me, which meant there were other options that didn't involve him dying and leaving Mom in a pit of depression and self-hatred. Granted, most of those options probably would have left the Leaf with a less than working village and may or may not have ignited the Fourth Shinobi World War, but honestly, I didn't care. I'd probably be arrested for treason for saying it, but if it meant even a chance at seeing Mommy smile a true smile, I'd give the world for it. Of course, I wasn't supposed to know all this. No one had told me directly, but it wasn't all that difficult to figure out. The villagers weren't exactly discreet with their mutterings and harsh whispers. That, and my resemblance to the fourth Hokage was so uncanny it's a genuine miracle no one else has noticed, despite me taking my mother's surname. Which I was extremely grateful for, by the way. Uzumaki Kushina. I absolutely loved the way her name sounded, the way it rolled off the tongue. Probably. I had never actually said it aloud before. Plus, having the surname Uzumaki made being named after a fish cake so much more bearable. Regardless, no matter how difficult living with her was, I wouldn't have it any other way. And it wasn't like I was trapped with her either. I still had Kakashi Nizan, Jiraiya, hell, even old man Tucci. None of them quite realized what it was like living with mommy, but I could have very easily told any one of them one and they could have done something about it. Tucci probably would have even been willing to take me in while mommy got help. Except that would mean seeing even less of her than I already do, and I don't quite think I can handle that. Besides, while Leaf was better than most thanks the Yamanaka, therapy in the ninja world more or less boiled down to suck it up and deal with it, and I'm not certain taking me away from mommy wouldn't just worsen her condition, like what happened when Aunt Mikoto started distancing herself from us. So I did what a Yamanaka would tell me to do and sucked it up and dealt with it. I would get up every morning and made a big breakfast, taking a plate, or bowl, up to mommy's room. Sometimes I couldn't help but just stare at her before waking her up. She was so beautiful, even with her sunken eyes and her too pale skin. She was skinny, too skinny, you could almost see her ribs poking out. But her hair was a gorgeous fiery mane, so silky and soft, her lips looked so pink and plump. But I couldn't keep staring or the food would get cold. I would gently shake her awake, and it would always take a minute or two. She slept so fitfully, and it was hard to pull her back from the cusp of her nightmares. But then she would blink her pretty violet eyes awake, staring blankly at me before I gestured to the meal in my hands. From there, it was a toss-up. Usually, she would just stare at me lifelessly for several seconds before turning around and falling back asleep. I would sigh in disappointment, setting the food down on the nightstand next to the bed, and left the room sullenly, not expecting any different, but hoping nonetheless. Occasionally, though, she would take the food from my hands, her face as blank as ever, eliciting a bright smile from me as her hands lightly brushed past mine, her skin calloused yet somehow still so soft. If I was especially lucky, she might even mutter a soft thanks that left me positively beaming for the rest of the day. Then I would sit and watch as she slowly ate, taking minuscule bites at a time, watching as her eyes glazed over for several minutes, lost in some unknown memory before suddenly focusing her attention back to her food, as if she only just remembered it was there and taking another tiny bite until she was done, never finishing more than half of it. Then I would take whatever was left of her food and kiss her on the cheek to let her know I still loved her, just in case she forgot. I'd wait a moment to see if she would respond, she never did, then leave silently to clean the mess in the kitchen, along with whatever other trash managed to clutter up the house. Afterwards, the day was mine, really. There was no telling when mommy would get up, and she could, and often did, sneak out of the house without me knowing, no matter how much attention I paid. There was little to no entertainment to be found around the house, much less outside it, what with the villagers' general avoidance of all things me. The glares and whispers never much bothered me. It was hardly worth the effort to care either way about them, and even when the occasional angry villager got a little too physical, any cuts or bruises that may have turned up always healed within a few hours at most. Besides, I knew they didn't actually believe I was the fox incarnate, not really. If they did, they would never do something as stupid as try to anger me. The only thing ever really angered me, no, infuriated me, was when they spoke about my mother. I don't know how, but somehow it had leaked that mommy was the nine-tailed fox's previous container. I was sure someone had done it on purpose. Someone high up as well. After all, they were the only ones who knew, and they kept it a secret for decades, which meant they weren't careless enough to let it slip accidentally, which meant they had done it purposefully. And I swear, when I find out who it was, I'll kill them. Because I may not give a when people call me demon brat and devil spawn. But if I hear so much as a single person mutter the words demon whore, then, well. Just ask the last person who dared in my presence. What the villagers don't realize is that whenever they see fit to push me around, I let them. Because letting them is far easier than dealing with the aftermath of fighting back. And remember when I said I have the day to myself? I spend it training. Even if I haven't entered the academy yet, the public library is a fountain of knowledge for beginners, and it's laughably easy to sneak past the haggard, nearsighted librarian always working the desk and hide in the rows and piles of books. Just teaching myself to read proved to be the biggest hurdle, but once I had overcome that particular obstacle, I soaked in information like a sponge. Of course, none of what I learned about basic chakra theory or simple katas was exactly dangerous, or even accurate, not for a 5-year-old. At least, not unless you were me. You see, one of the most basic applications of chakra was to use it to enhance your body. Make it stronger, faster, more durable, and so on. Most children my age didn't have enough chakra to enhance anything, even if they had the control. I, on the other hand, had a lot of chakra. Of course, I couldn't just pump my arms full of chakra and lift up a mountain, not without blowing my arms off in the process. There was a technique to it, a skill that took time and practice to refine, but again, I could sort of cheat in this regard when it came to practicing. For most, if one just carelessly threw their chakra around, they could easily damage both their muscle tissue and chakra coils irreparably. But not me. Thanks to the combined forces of my Uzumaki heritage and the demon fox in my stomach, I could heal from almost anything short of loss of limb, and even then, I wasn't sure it wouldn't just grow back. And you know how when you break a bone, the point of fracture grows back stronger than before? That's exactly what happened to my body. As long as I kept the proper nutrients in my body, any torn tissue would stitch back tighter and stronger, any ruptured coils would be thicker and flow easier. Even when all was said and done and I'd finally more or less mastered the basics of the technique, I was never sure whether it was because I'd finally figured out how to do it correctly, or if my body simply adjusted itself accordingly. Either way, by the end of it, I was intimately familiar with my chakra. And it was, almost intoxicating. I could, and occasionally did, spend the whole day just meditating, playing with my chakra, spinning it, folding it, twisting it. Flooding my body with chakra, pumping every inch of me with it until I felt I was about to burst, then suddenly releasing it. Clamping down on my chakra network and halting the flow, then pulling back on it and forcing it to flow in the opposite direction. The only thing I never touched was the fox's chakra. Oh, it was always there, just underneath, mixed in with my own. It's part of why my natural reserves were so large, it was constantly pressuring my coils, forcing them to grow and thicken to adapt. But that was just the infinitesimally small amount that the seal purposefully leaked to build up my resistance to the fox's poisonous chakra and was already so ingrained in my own that it may have well had been mine. But if I focused deep enough into my core, I could sense it. That unfathomably vast pit of oppressive rage and hatred that made up the fox's chakra, though, since the fox was supposedly just a giant, sentient chakra construct, it wouldn't be inaccurate to say that it was the fox. I never really understood why people said the nine-tailed fox was a force of nature until I discovered that pit. Just sensing the sheer size and scope of it compared to my own was akin to comparing a firefly to the sun, and the pure hate and anger it radiated was almost alien, and yet still somehow so very human. I wasn't even slightly ashamed to admit I did my very best to avoid direct contact with it at all times. Various chakra exercises weren't the only things practiced, though. Early academy textbooks were available to anyone in the public library. And I studied them with a fervor. As boring as subjects like projectile physics, human biology, and poison chemistry could be, I soaked up every bit of information I could learn, and when it came to learning the academy katas, I practiced them vigorously. I'd spend hours upon hours practicing at home or in the woods until I could do them exactly as the books described quickly and efficiently, even sneaking into the academy training grounds to watch the older kids do them when I wasn't sure if I was doing it correctly. I'd say I trained until I dropped, but that never actually happened, no matter how much I worked myself. And given that I would often push myself to my limit and kept the pace up until night had fallen without me realizing, I was no longer sure if it was even possible for me to collapse from exhaustion. Sure, I worked myself to the bone, until my body ached and my skin was raw and bleeding from striking trees over and over again, but I have never actually passed out. The greatest treasure trove I'd found, though, was a textbook all about the Academy 3, the transformation, substitution, and clone techniques. This one wasn't actually found in the library. Any and all ninjutsu and genjutsu were regulated with varying degrees of strictness. Even something as simple as the Academy 3 wasn't normally available to the general public, though there were no real consequences if it had somehow found its way into it. Some kid seemed to be pulling an all-nighter, probably in a last-ditch effort not to fail, at the library of all places, and I took the liberty of borrowing the book during one of his 10-minute power naps, i.e. dozing off every so often before abruptly awakening. The look on his face when he realized it was missing was priceless. The academy was actually fairly lax when it came to the written and physical portions of the graduation test. Basically, as long as your handwriting was vaguely legible and you could more or less keep us with the rest of your class, then you really only needed to worry about the ninjutsu portion of the test, and that portion was very strict. Because being a ninja was all about chakra, and if you couldn't master those 3 techniques, then that meant you stood virtually no chance of being even a halfway decent ninja. Your physical scores had to be truly exceptional to even stand a chance at passing if you couldn't do the Academy 3. They also only started teaching students the 3 in the final year, because, like I said before, carelessly messing with your chakra can cause irreparable damage, especially for children, whose chakra coils were still developing. If a small child, whose reserves were minuscule and control atrocious, attempted a ninjutsu, even one as chakra-intensive as the simple clone jutsu, they could very well die of chakra exhaustion. So-called geniuses like Itachi and Kakashi Nizen, and Minato, instinctively used their chakra even in everyday tasks without ever first learning how, and this helped them subconsciously know exactly how much chakra to put into a technique to avoid killing themselves. Again, I was an exception to this rule. I don't know exactly how much chakra I had compared to the average ninja, but I did know I had much more than a freshly minted genin. Even beyond the Academy 3, there were few jutsu that could wipe me out in one go. Chakra exhaustion wasn't something to worry about. And, since brute force training my body with chakra enhancement had given me ample control over my chakra, the Academy 3 were almost disappointingly simple to learn. Hell, the least chakra-intensive technique, the clone technique, was the most difficult to learn, simply because it took so little chakra that I had a hard time siphoning off just enough to power it, but not so much as to overload it. I had a feeling it would only get harder as my reserves grew. I wasn't quite satisfied with just learning them, though, mostly because they seemed so impractical. After all, who has the time to form hand seals in the middle of battle? The substitution jutsu uses 5 whole hand seals, and that one would presumably be the most time-sensitive since it was mostly used to dodge enemy attacks. And higher-ranked jutsu used even more. The only way I could think of to make them feasible in battle was to either just keep practicing until I could go through them all nearly instantaneously, which made a certain amount of sense. The book seemed to place a lot of emphasis on doing just that, or find a way to do it without them. At first, the idea seemed crazy. Jutsu were performed using hand seals, that's just how it worked, but whenever I went through the seals, I could feel my chakra shifting and shaping on its own, and I figured, couldn't I just mold it manually? I don't know. It made sense in theory, but in practice, I just couldn't get it down. No matter how much I pushed and pulled and twisted and folded, the end result was never quite what I get when I just used hand seals. I was certain I could do it, but until then, I resolved to just practice going through the hand seals faster and faster. The only thing I very much wanted to learn, but just couldn't find any information on, was Fuinjutsu. There were almost no mentions of the art, only ever in passing, and the only detailed description of it, a single paragraph in a book describing the different ninja arts, didn't so much as hint as to how to get into it. This really disappointed me. More than anything, I wanted to learn the sealing arts. It was my family's legacy. Really, the only way to learn was to ask mommy to teach me, but, well, that just wasn't an option at the moment. She just wasn't around. I didn't really know what she got up while she was gone, though I had heard stories damaged property and hospitalized ninja, so I knew it wasn't anything too degrading, but I did know she drank a lot. Because she always came back drunk. And it took a lot to get an Uzumaki drunk. Our metabolism was just too high, we had to drink a lot and drink it quickly to even get tipsy, and it also meant we never got hangovers. It's why Tsunade of the Sannin was so famous for her drinking. She was a quarter Uzumaki, and mom could drink Tsunade under the table, not that I was exactly proud of that fact. So I would wait every night for her to come home, usually training in the meantime, and I wouldn't fall asleep until she was. And if it got too late, I would go out to look for her, though after the first few times she was surprisingly consistent in showing up before I went out. Usually, when she returned, she would have that same blank mask she always wore. She would see me in the entrance hall waiting for her, and she might grumble under her breath about how it was late, and I should get to bed before stumbling her way to her own room, and I would nod, smiling brightly at her. Sometimes she would come home crying. I always hated when she did. As soon as she sees me her tears would multiply and she would hobble over, engulfing me in her arms as she apologized over and over and over again for everything and nothing all at once, and my heart would ache because no matter what I did, no matter how tightly I hugged her back or how many tears I kissed away, she wouldn't stop crying. I would carry her, drag her really, I was much too small to lift her up off the ground, to her room, setting her down on her bed, but she wouldn't let go of me so I would lay down with her, holding her until she quieted and fell asleep. But no matter how badly I wanted to stay there, wrapped in her embrace, once she fell asleep I would slowly untangle myself from her arms and head back to my own room, where I would lay in my own bed silently, my heart burning, but I wouldn't cry, because mommies cried enough for the both of us. Sometimes she would come smiling. That was always the worst. Because when she did that, it was because she had drunk herself to the point where she could no longer see anything other than what was in front of her. She would stumble in, her violet eyes locking with my blue, and her smile would brighten and my breath would hitch because God, she was so beautiful when she was smiling, but at the same time it hurt so much because it looked so fake. Naruto-chan, she would call, rushing over to me, surprisingly coordinated for how much she no doubt drank, and picking me up easily, spinning me around and causing a giggle to rise up from my throat. Then she would stop and press her forehead against mine and look deeply into my eyes, and I would do the same for her. And I'd want to cry from how broken she looked. Then I would notice the smell of sweat and dirt and alcohol that clung to her like a second skin, and I'd grimace, and she'd notice, of course. Eehee. She'd laugh sheepishly, like I'd just caught her stealing from my personal stash of ramen. I guess I do kinda stink, Musum. How about we take a bath together, We haven't done that in a while. Not since you were last this drunk, I would think, but I'd just smile and nod my head. Great. And she'd take a step and suddenly all sense of poise would leave her and she'd stumble harshly, and I would have to break free of her arms to catch myself and avoid getting hurt, but mommy wouldn't be able to do the same and she would fall to the ground in a feeble mess. I'd frown and make sure she was okay, but she'd just laugh it off with a joke about having one too many drinks, and I'd force myself to smile again. I'd pick up as much of her as I could and drag her to the bathing room, while she coos over how strong I'd gotten and how I was going to be an incredible kunoichi. Then I'd help her out of her clothes before discarding my own, and we'd rinse each other off. Once all the dirt and grime had washed off and all that was left was smooth, porcelain skin, it was very easy to get distracted by her figure. It was lean and toned, muscle visible, but not prominent, and still so curvy and soft. She'd notice, of course, and tease me about my blatant staring. It'd make me blush, but it wouldn't stop me. Finally, we'd get in the tub to soak, mommy getting in first and then dragging me onto her lap. My face would be flaming from being so close with nothing between us, but I'd be smiling widely all the same. By this point she'd be dozing off, and I'd be admiring her gorgeous face when she'd suddenly snap awake and see me staring again, and smirk. Like what you see, Musum, she'd ask teasingly, and I'd blush harder, but my smile wouldn't fade and I'd nod. Well, she'd say, how about a kiss, then? My heart would quicken in my chest, my blush intensifying further, and I'd lean in and peck her on the cheek, but then she'd pout adorably and say, not like that Naruto-chan. A real kiss. And I'd really, really want to, but I want our first kiss to be something special and not just a drunken tease to be forgotten the next day, so I'd shake my head and bury my head into her chest, and she'd whine cutely about how I'm being unfair. Moments would pass as we both enjoy our silent embrace before mommy speaks again, and she says my name softly, almost reverently, and I'd stiffen because I know what's coming next. Naruto, she'd say, and I'd tighten my hold on her, and I can't keep the tears from leaking because I hate this part and I don't want our moment together to end. I love you. I'd pull back suddenly, looking desperately at her as she stares back at me, searchingly, each second that passes looking more and more broken. Aren't you going to say it back? And I desperately try to show her how hopelessly in love with her I am, to get her to see the affection and devotion I have for her that's showing on my face and shining in my eyes. But she doesn't see it, and she breaks down crying, and I can't do anything but hold her as she sobs. You never say it back. But I do. I say it every time I see her. It's written in my smile and shining in my eyes. You never say anything. You must hate me. I could never hate her. I'd give the world for her, but she's too lost in her grief and self-loathing, and nothing I do can get her to see it. And later, when I've gotten her out of the bath and into her bed and I'm lying awake in the darkness of my room, I let out a single, gut-wrenching sob as I wish that any of it was real. Because the next day, everything is just as it was before, and I don't think she even remembers it. Nothing had changed, so I do it all over, again and again, every day, hoping and praying that one day she'll see the endless love I have for her. And finally start working toward getting better. Because I don't think I could survive anything less. I'm starting the academy tomorrow. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. It wasn't really anything to be excited about. I was certain I was already on par with the average genin. The only thing I needed to learn was how to throw kunai and shuriken, but I doubted that would be all that difficult. The academy was, at best, a place to make friends and get to know my future comrades, not that I any hope, nor desire, for that regard. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. But. Well, it was stupid really. It was such a stupid, trivial thing, and it really shouldn't bother me. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. I used to dream of the day I would first attend the academy. Not the academy itself. No, like most things, my dream heavily involved mommy. It was a simple dream really. I would wake up and mommy and I would share a breakfast together before we got ready for the day, and then we'd leave for the academy together, walking hand in hand, where she would drop me off with a smile and a wave. That's it. Just a nice, simple little scene that would make me smile every time I thought of it. But that's all it was. A dream. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. I wasn't even something I expected to happen, just something I liked to daydream about every once in a while, but then the first day started fast approaching and it became harder and harder to ignore the fact that it wasn't going to happen. It hurt, and I felt so dumb and childish, because really, what did it matter in the end? Lots of kids didn't even want their parents to attend, either for a want to appear independent, or for a fear that they would embarrass them, and oh, how I hated those ungrateful brats, those that pushed away their parents' loving hugs and kisses because they were embarrassed. So I shoved away all the hurt and hid myself away deep in the woods, taking out all of my frustrations on the nearest hashirama tree. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. My chakra flared erratically as my emotions got the better of me, a problem I hadn't been able to fix since it happened so rarely, and I packed far too much chakra into that last punch. The wood splintered violently, bark flying every which way as my fist buried itself into the tree, and I heard an audible snap as a jolt of pain shot up my arm. I hissed aloud, pulling back my arm and gently cradling it in my hand as I tried to assess the damage. My forearm was badly bruised, blackening sickly, and there was a distinct lump centered in the worst of it. Definitely broken. I sighed frustratedly and let my arm fall limp at my side, ignoring the sharp, stinging pain. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. I wasn't sure how long I spent there. It was so very easy to get lost in the methodical pattern, but at some point long after night fell I was abruptly forced from my training-induced stupor when I heard a voice calling my name. I whirled around to face whoever had snuck up on me, taking a defensive posture, but I relaxed slightly when I saw silver tufts of hair. "Naruto, what are you doing out here?" Kakashi Nizan asked. I blinked up at him before glancing back at the tree I'd been abusing, then back to Kakashi. If he thought it was unusual for a 6-year-old to be able to punch holes into trees like the one behind me was sporting, he didn't show it. Then again, by the time he was my age, he was already a chunin, so he wasn't really the best example for normal. He let out a small sigh, barely. I would have missed it if I wasn't so focused on him. "I don't know why you feel the need to train so hard, Naruto. You haven't even entered the academy yet." I stayed silent, just stared up at him with wide eyes. Right, well. Come on, it's late anyway. I'll walk you home." I nodded and made my way toward him, keeping my broken arm stiff at my side to keep the pain minimal. Kakashi Nizan noticed my odd posture. He had always been able to read me with surprising accuracy. I wasn't sure if it was a shinobi thing, or if it was just him, and narrowed his single visible eye at me. "Are you hurt? Let me see." I grudgingly obliged, holding out my arm for his inspection. There was no point in resisting when he was in his what I affectionately referred to as mother hen mode. He gently poked and prodded at my arm before diagnosing it as broken, which prompted me to roll my eyes at his pointing out too obvious. Though I didn't expect him to suddenly hoist me up off the ground and practically cradle me in his arms. I squirmed uselessly in his grasp, because what the hell, but he just tightened his hold on me as he jumped up into the trees and hopped away with me. "Stop that," he admonished. "It's badly broken. If it doesn't get proper treatment, it could heal incorrectly. I'm taking you to the hospital." I sighed, half in exasperation, half resignation. It wouldn't heal him properly, the fox would make sure of that, and I wasn't even sure the hospital would treat me, but trying to stop Kakashi Nizan when he was like this was a bit like trying to dig out a lake with a spoon. So I forced myself to relax and rested my head against his chest, chuckling internally at how the motion made him tense. For all his skill as a shinobi, he was somehow even worse at genuine human interaction than I was, which was saying something, really. It wasn't so bad, really, being carried. It was principle that made me protest more than anything, but since I was a child, I couldn't really complain. Besides, while his chest was rather hard, it wasn't bulky enough to be truly uncomfortable. A solid 7 on the cuddleability scale, he was nowhere near mommy, though. The trip to the hospital was both short and exhilarating. I loved Shunshin. I couldn't wait to learn it for myself. Kakashi Nizan graciously allowed me to keep what little dignity I had and set me down to trail behind him when he reached the entrance. Watching the masked ninja verbally outmaneuver the receptionist who was shamelessly attempting to flirt with him, though I wasn't entirely sure he simply didn't notice her advances, was rather amusing, and her drastic change in demeanor when she noticed my presence was downright comical. "What is she doing here?" the lady practically screeched. Of course, it was also on the verge of suicidal since Kakashi Nizan was still in mother hen mode. The temperature dropped dramatically as Kakashi narrowed his eye dangerously. The receptionist lady visibly paled and trembled in fright as he leveled his gaze at her. "Is that what killing intent felt like?" and spoke, slowly and coolly. "Like I said, she is here to get treatment. Her arm is broken." Right, oh of course, Hataki-san. I'll call a nurse right away." Moments later I was being attended to by a low-level mednine who scowled darkly at me before, much like the receptionist, practically pissing herself when Kakashi Nizan glared at her. Vibrant green healing chakra flowed over my arm, snapping the bone back into place and stitching it back together. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, though I wasn't sure if it was universal or purposeful. The mednine frowned as she worked. Why has it taken so long to get treatment? Kakashi Nizan glanced at her. What do you mean? The break is several days old, by the looks of it. It's already started to heal. That's impossible. It's barely been 2 hours since it broke. I blinked. He was watching me. The mednine's eyes darkened and muttered under her breath, "Demon freak." Kakashi Nizan looked at her sharply, but didn't say anything more, and I kept my face carefully blank. It didn't take long to get my arm healed, and soon we were not so subtly being shooed out of the hospital. As Kakashi Nizan began to lead me home, he spoke softly. "I'm sorry, Naruto. You don't deserve to be treated like that." I looked up at him, tilting my head questioningly, wondering why he was apologizing. He was, after all, one of the very few people who treated me well. He misinterpreted it though. As good as he was at reading me, he wasn't perfect, and thought I was asking why I was treated the way I was. The remainder of the walk was silent. It didn't take long to reach my house, and I'd expected Kakashi to simply drop me off and head off on his way, but instead he went up to the front door and knocked. I blinked up at him, wondering what he was doing. He knocked again after a few moments passed and there was no response. I was about to brush past him and simply open the door when, much to my muted surprise, I heard movement from the other side and the door opened to reveal my beautiful mommy. I couldn't help the happy grin that graced my face. Either I was out training far later than I thought, or she just happened to be home early for whatever reason, but it was wonderful to see her, regardless. She blinked wearily at us. "Kakashi," she mumbled out. "What are you doing here?" Kakashi Nizan smiled sadly under his mask. "Kushina Nizan. It's been a while." She blinked again and stared blankly at him. He gestured to me. I found Naruto out training in the woods. She had broken her arm from pushing herself too hard. I wasn't even tired actually, but I saw Mommy's eyes widened in surprise and she turned sharply to me. "What? Are you okay?" She took a single step forward, her arms slightly outstretched, as if to check me over. My heart fluttered in my chest at the unusual amount of concern she was showing. It wasn't that she didn't care, I knew she did. She just didn't show it. I simply smiled brightly at her and nodded. "I took her to the hospital," Kakashi continued. "She's fine now, but Kushina Nizan, you should let her know that it's okay to relax. This isn't the first time I've seen her stay out this late to train. I've told her this already, but she'll actually listen to you. It's true. I liked training. It gave me something to do, and I wanted to be strong enough to protect Mommy. If she asked me to hold off on it though, I would. I'd do anything she asked of me." I hadn't realized Kakashi Nizan had been watching me as much as he apparently had been, though. I was flattered by his concern, I supposed, but it really was unnecessary. "She'll have plenty of time to train after the academy starts up tomorrow," finished Kakashi. Mommy blinked her pretty violet eyes several times. "Oh, right. The academy. Right. Don't tell me you forgot." Kakashi sighed exasperatedly. "Honestly, Kushina Nizan. I didn't," Mommy insisted, not quite indignantly. "I knew she did. I just didn't realize it was so soon." Kakashi blinked, winked, skeptically at her. "Right. Just don't forget, okay? How do you think Naruto would feel if you didn't show for the induction ceremony?" Mommy glanced at me and for a split second I saw her guilt and shame showing in her eyes before she looked away. She was quiet for a moment. "I won't," she finally whispered. I knew she would. Kakashi said his awkward goodbyes, leaving me with Mommy. We stepped inside and I continued to stare up at Mommy with wide eyes, wondering what she would do. She stared back at me. The academy, huh? I nodded vigorously. I'm sure you'll do great. Just like Dash, she cut herself off, wincing harshly, then quickly blanked her features. It's late. You should get to dinner. Have you had dinner? We should have dinner. She moved toward the kitchen, and I toddled dutifully after her. She opened up the refrigerator and started rummaging around, muttering to herself all the while. Rice, eggs, noodles. Ramen. We could go to Ichiraku's. Haven't been there since, no, something else. Fish. I could stir fry. Several moments passed as I watched Mommy search uselessly for something to make before I decided to take over. As much as I wanted to taste Mommy's cooking, I knew if she continued on like this, then she would likely change her mind about dinner altogether. With a small sigh, I slipped under her and reached into the fridge, grabbing for ingredients, ignoring the way she froze above me. And Naruto-chan? Instead of responding, I stuffed my tiny arms full of everything I would need and moved out from under her to set it all onto the counter, placed the stepping stool I used when cooking in front of the stove, after using it in front of the sink to fill up a pot of water, and got to work making homemade ramen. It was easy enough to learn how to make it after watching Tucci so many times, not to mention studying some old recipes books in the library. This wouldn't be as good though. Not with the pre-made noodle I was using. I could make them from scratch, but it was late and that would take too long. When I heard shuffling behind me, I discreetly glanced back to see Mommy had taken a seat at the dinner table with her head propped up on her arm, watching me with a sullen look in her eye. I felt my cheeks heat up involuntarily under her gaze and turned my attention back to my work. It didn't take long afterwards to finish making the ramen. I poured as much as possible into 2 separate bowls and carried the first one over to her, setting it down in front of her with a huff. They were large bowls, then sitting myself across from her and setting my own bowl in front of me. I smiled happily at the thought of us eating together as I clapped my hands together in a silent itadakimasu, fervently hoping Mommy wouldn't run off at the last second for whatever reason. My eyes lit up as she picked up a pair of chopsticks and took her first bite, and I watched intently as she blinked twice down at the bowl in front of her. It's good, she muttered. I'm pretty sure my responding smile could be described as blinding. Unfortunately, dinner was a quick and quiet affair, not that I expected anything else. Mommy ate slowly. I was already done with my third bowl by the time she was finished her first, though she didn't ask for more. Still, she finished the bowl, which was a step up from usual. She went to bed afterwards, and I did the same after cleaning up. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of hope well up inside me. I knew it was just dinner leaving me giddy and excited, but maybe Mommy would walk me to the academy. I mean, she stayed for dinner, right? And that never happens. She even might have made it herself, if I hadn't interfered. Maybe she would do this simple thing for me, too? It was stupid of me to get my hopes up. The next day started like any other. I woke up, washed myself, and started on breakfast. Only when I brought it up to Mommy to wake her up, she wasn't even there. I stared at the empty bed for what felt like the longest time, tears welling up in my eyes, threatening to spill onto my cheeks. I slowly, carefully set the plate I was carrying on the nightstand. Maybe she was already up. Maybe she started a bath while I was cooking. I left the bedroom and headed for the washroom, trying my very hardest not to run. Empty. Maybe she was already downstairs, waiting for breakfast. My feet pounded loudly against the stairs as I ran to the kitchen, only to skid to a stop when I found it empty. Desperate, I turned back up the stairs and ran to my room, but no. Empty. Like the rest of the house. I fell to the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, tears falling freely now. Stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I knew this was going to happen, and I still got my hopes up anyway. I was so stupid. I wasn't really sure how long I sat there, but at some point, my tears ran dry. I slowly wiped my tears from my eyes and blanked my expression, something I think I was quite good at after watching mommy for so long, and made my way back downstairs. I wasn't hungry anymore, so I just grabbed my pack, filled with everything I would need at the academy, and left. Ignoring the glares and harsh whispers sent my way was second nature by now, and I hardly noticed them as I headed for the academy. I was late, it seemed, for the Hokage was already there, spouting off to a crowd of 8-year-olds about the will of fire and serving the country and the rest of the standard propaganda that I didn't really care to listen to. I slipped seamlessly into the crowd of children, though I'm sure the Hokage noticed, and listened with only half an ear as I thought on my plan for the academy. I was sure I could graduate in a year like Kakashi and Itachi, though whether I could beat their scores or not, much less Minato's, was another matter, but I wasn't really sure I wanted to. Well, that's not exactly true, I wanted to be a ninja as soon as possible. It's just that graduation meant missions, and missions meant less time with mommy. I sighed quietly as the Hokage finished up his speech. Well, it's not like I spent all that much time with her. Anyway, I decided to just do my best and see what happens. There was spattered clapping as I was ushered inside the academy along with the rest of the slightly older children. I noticed the Hokage staring straight at me and I studiously ignored him. I didn't trust him in the slightest. He was, after all, one of the few possible people who could have leaked mommy's Jinchuriki status. But besides that, he was the one who allowed me to attend the academy 2 years early. A good thing, all things considered, but I didn't ask him to do so, and I doubt mommy did, so he did it of his own accord, which meant he had some sort of agenda for me. Not exactly unexpected, given the giant fox in my gut, but I wanted no part of it, regardless. It wasn't too long until I found myself sitting in the back of a classroom, silently studying the class. Civilians, mostly. In fact, it only looked like there were 2 clan kids, one obviously a Hyuga, probably a branch member. The other was harder to place, but given that she looked ready to clonk out at any moment, it was safe to say she was a Nara. I doubted even half of them would make it to the 2nd year. Civilians just didn't understand how much work it took to be a shinobi, and their kids were nowhere near ready for it. A white-haired man with a bandana wrapped around his head, the teacher I presumed, burst into the class, effectively silencing any and all excited mumblings and ongoing conversations. He introduced himself as Mizuki, just Mizuki, and began taking roll. That's when my troubles started. It was easy to tell when he got to my name, for he visibly sneered and spat my name out. Uzumaki Naruto. I raised my hand. He glared at me. You will respond appropriately when your name is called. Is that clear? I blinked at him. Is that clear? He said again, more firmly. I nodded, and the teacher narrowed his eyes at me. Uzumaki Naruto. He said again, fiercely and deliberately. I kept my hand raised. There were smatterings of laughter from the other children, though I wasn't quite sure was funny. A snarl from Mizuki quickly silenced them. That's it, he exclaimed, slamming his clipboard down on the table. He pointed to the door. Go sit out in the hall. I'll be with you in a moment to discuss your punishment. I looked to Mizuki, then to the door, then back to Mizuki. Without a word, I stood and left the room. I was definitely graduating early, I decided as I sat beside the door. I wondered who my Jonin sensei would be. Ideally, I'd want an apprenticeship with Kakashi Nizan, but he was too busy trying to commit suicide via ANBU, so that wasn't likely, even without the apprenticeship. Really though, I didn't know anyone else enough to have an opinion on them except maybe Itachi, from the few times I've seen him with Kakashi. He seemed like a pretty mellow guy, though a bit stressed, if the lines under his eyes were any indicator, perfect for a sensei, but he was still technically a chunin, despite being in ANBU, so that was out, too. Although, there was Kakashi Nizan's self-proclaimed rival, Guy. What I'd seen of his personality made being his student a frightening prospect, to be sure, but he was quite strong, and taijutsu was something I wanted to specialize in, aside from fuinjutsu. Well, regardless, I needed to graduate first. Mizuki did eventually emerge from the classroom, after classes had ended, and started lecturing me on proper procedure and respect for authorities and blah, blah, blah. His lecturing gradually became more and more heated as I stood there, silently staring up at him until he was practically raving at me. I didn't know what he expected. I had made it perfectly clear I wasn't going to say a word, no matter how red his face became. At some point, he assigned a detention of some sort for the next day, which I ignored and sent me on my way. The following months proved to follow a similar arrangement. I continuously got in trouble for not using my voice, not even bothering to ask if I even could, and received constant lecturing, i.e. yelled at repeatedly, for not showing up to detentions. Honestly, they probably would have expelled me if not for being a Jinchuriki, and thus required to be a ninja. I figured I would just deal with it until I graduated. Should only be a year after all, but even that didn't seem possible. Since I was forced to sit out the first day, I didn't take the placement exams to see what level I was, and instead of having me take them later, they just gave me a big fat 0 and put me smack down at the bottom of the class. I didn't really care. I figured I could just bring my placement back up eventually. At least, that would have been the case if the teachers had ever heard of anything called fair play before. Worksheets and tests were a joke. It didn't matter how well I did, I failed everything. Not utterly, the actual grade varied, but not a single test came back with a passing grade even on things I know I got right. I'm pretty sure I know the date my own dad died. It's my own freaking birthday. I even stole the grading sheet in advance once, just to make sure I wasn't somehow imagining everything. I was in no way expecting it to be as easy as it was to break into the academy in the dead of night to do so, but I did. Every answer, word for word, matched the grading sheet. They didn't even call me out on cheating, just failed me and called it a day. Taijutsu practice was even worse, borderline abusive, if I cared to call it such. It was only the first year, so it was mainly supposed to be focused on building stamina, familiarizing the kids with the beginner's katas, and basically what amounted to play fights between students. For me, though, the teachers decided I needed special lessons, and pretty much just took the opportunity to beat me up. Not badly, however thinly veiled it was. They were still pretending to help me, and I'm pretty sure they thought they were hurting me far more than they actually were. And their lessons did actually help, too. The gap between Chunin and Genin was vast, and the opportunity to fight with one was an invaluable experience. Not to mention, the looks on their faces when I managed to get a hit in was priceless. All in all, the academy was even more worthless than I thought it would be. So I stopped going. I still showed up for tests, just to prove I existed, and also every once in a while to spar, not that they would call it that, with a Chunin, but otherwise I just did what I had always done, stole books from the library and taught myself. The academy library went far more in depth into ninja techniques than the public one, and I devoured every book I could get my hands on. It took me a solid 2 weeks to bring my shuriken jutsu up to graduate level, and again, breaking into the academy armory for the weapons was ridiculously easy, and afterwards I simply studied and practiced everything I could if I thought I could use it. Unfortunately, there was still nothing on fuinjutsu. It just seemed to be a lost art. Regardless, there was really nothing stopping me from graduating but the bias of ignorant teachers. I wasn't really certain what to do about that, but I figured if my lack of attendance or terrible grades became a problem, then the Hokage would get involved. Maybe I could do something about it then. Until then, though, these were going to be some tediously long years. It's no real surprise I'm always alone. The other students avoid me, my teachers hate me, and mommy hurts every time she looks at me. The only person who deigns themselves to spend time with me is Kakashi Nizan, but he's so busy with Umbu that those moments are few and far between. I don't really mind. The solitude gave me more time to train, but I sort of wish there was someone to give me some sort of direction, instead of just kind of blundering my way through like I've been doing. Even the few times I've bothered going to class proved fruitless in that regard. Lately, the teachers have taken to ignoring my presence entirely instead of cursing my very existence, like they usually do. Apparently, it took far more effort to actively hate me than to just pretend I wasn't there. The phrase, "alone in a crowded room," came to mind. The point is, I've run into a metaphorical brick wall when it came to training. I just didn't know how to continue. Sure, I could do all the strength training I want, and while it would certainly help me get physically stronger when it came everything else, I didn't have an inkling on how to progress. The library could only teach me so much. I'd perfected the academy katas, you could only get so accurate with shuriken jutsu, and I had the chakra control exercises down pat. I'd read about nature transformation as well, but couldn't find anything detailing how to actually do it. So I was stuck. And that irritated me greatly, but since I couldn't do anything about it, I forced myself to shove away all my frustrations and focus on what I could do, which basically amounted to strength training. But when I couldn't do that, and my anger got the better of me and I ended up accidentally blowing up a tree, and usually a limb in the process, I sat myself down, usually on the underside of a tree, just because I could, and played with my chakra to calm down. One day, I was doing just that, when I decided to try something new. I had just finished abusing some poor tree in the woods, which was now sporting a fist-sized hole in its trunk, and plunked myself on the underside of one of its branches, focusing just enough chakra in my butt to keep me there, and started meditating. It was difficult to mess around with my chakra while keeping a constant flow on my underside to stop me from falling. Or at least it was. I had long since gotten used to it. I like to knead my chakra. Well, kneading was the closest equivalent to what I was doing that I could come up with. Basically, I gather as much chakra as I could and ball it up in my chest, then press it together, flattening it out like a pancake, then fold it in on itself again and again until I couldn't anymore, then flatten it out all over again. It was fun and felt kind of strange, but in a good way. The whole process took several minutes, and I found it very relaxing. But today I wanted to try something different. Up until now, everything I'd done with my chakra was done inside my body, which, made sense. But I had bothered to actually attend class earlier that day, and they had a lecture about chakra and how it affects the world around us, usually in terms of jutsu. Basically why chakra allowed us to do all these amazing things. I mostly ignored it. It wasn't anything I didn't already know, but it gave me an idea. What would happen if I pushed my chakra outside of my body? Not for a jutsu, or any purpose at all really, just for the sake of it. I was curious, so spread my chakra across my body and pooled it into each of my chakra points, and pushed. I wasn't expecting it to push back. At least, I think that's what happened. I wasn't totally sure. As soon as I let loose my chakra, it felt as if the world suddenly compressed, pressing into me from every which way. It wasn't painful, but extremely disorienting, and so utterly surprising that I lost control of my chakra, both causing the feeling to cease, as well as knocking me out of the tree. Luckily I managed to twist myself around in time to land on my feet. I blinked several times in confusion, wondering what in the world just happened. Deciding the best way to find out would be to try again, I sat down next to the base of the tree and closed my eyes, focused my chakra, and pushed it out. Immediately the sensation of the world pressing in on me returned, but this time I was better prepared for it. I kept a steady stream of chakra flowing from my body as I tried to make sense of what I was feeling. It was like the world just shrunk. People everywhere. Civilians bustling about in the market and residential districts, ninja hopping along the rooftops or training in training grounds both near and far. Some people's presence seemed more prominent than others. I could barely feel the civilians. They were like insects, noticed, but disregarded. Others seemed to drown out everyone around them. One powerful presence encompassed the entirety of the Hokage's residence, and it didn't take much to guess who it was. The Hokage felt like burning ash, old and weathered, but still dangerous. I had to really focus to pinpoint anyone else in the area. But another presence shadowed even his. And there was no need to guess who it was. My heart clenched as I recognized Mommy's chakra located in what was probably one of the many bars scattered around the leaf. She felt like a once bright flame that had been doused long ago, but even then her aura was almost omnipresent, filling the entire district and then some, probably the result of being both an Uzumaki and a previous Jinchuriki. Uzumaki. I realized with a start. There were three things Uzumaki were most well known for: their incredible chakra, fuinjutsu, and their sensing abilities. This must be what I was doing. The world didn't shrink, I was just feeling everyone all at once. Geez, I knew we were incredible, but this is ridiculous. Or maybe my being a Jinchuriki was having an effect on its range? I had no idea how far Mommy could sense after all. I was tempted to spend more time watching Mommy, but I knew if I just watched her I would worry needlessly, so instead I looked around to see if I could find Kakashi Nizen when I noticed something I really should have noticed right away. Someone was watching me. Then several things happened all at once. Before I could even properly register who was stalking me, a dark, oppressive chakra just appeared out of nowhere in one of the clan compounds, which one I wasn't sure. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt the twisted chakra, strangely familiar, though I had no idea why. Then the auras of those around it abruptly began to disappear one by one, with something similar happening elsewhere in the compound. As I took in the powerful chakra, a strange unearthly rage resonated through me, one that hardly felt like my own, but before I could do so much as gasp, I heard the rustling of leaves and the unmistakable whistling of a kunai flying through the air. My eyes shot open in surprise and my hands almost reflexively ran through the signs for the substitution jutsu, finishing just as I saw a glint of metal inches from my face before my vision distorted as the jutsu took hold. I landed several yards away up in a tree, grabbing hold of a nearby branch to steady myself. I stilled as much as I could and halted my breathing, desperately trying to calm my pounding heart, watching as a figure in a white animal mask jumped down to where I was just a moment ago. I blinked in surprise. An umbu just tried to kill me? But, no, the mask was wrong, somehow. Every umbu mask I'd seen had some sort of decorative colored pattern to them, but this one was just plain white. A fake? But why? Who would try to kill me? Okay, that was a stupid question. But why dress up as an umbu? Any old face mask would do. Unless, of course, it really was an umbu, and the Hokage was trying to kill me. Or perhaps a ninja had gone rogue, that seemed more likely. The figure did seem strangely small, a younger member would be more likely to give into emotional influence. The possibly fake umbu yanked out the kunai that had lodged itself into the tree that was behind me and began scanning the area for me, and I realized that this was a terrible place to reflect. Survive now, think later. Running wasn't an option. The moment I moved, he would no doubt know exactly where I was. The only thing left was to fight. My heart desperately beating against my ribcage, I slowly, quietly, drew a handful of shuriken. They wouldn't do any damage, not if he really was umbu, but it just might distract him long enough to do something. I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. But maybe I could, yeah, that might work. For a second at least. Taking one last deep breath to steel myself, I slowly formed the signs: ram, snake, tiger. Then I tossed the shuriken. The umbu's head snapped to my direction and he jumped up onto the trunk of the tree, letting the shuriken clatter uselessly against the ground while he pushed off the tree, heading in my direction, but I was already running through the signs for the substitution jutsu. I replaced myself with one of the shuriken, cursing in my head as the disorienting jutsu caused me to stumble slightly, wasting precious seconds. I quickly formed the seals for the clone technique one again, then tossed another handful of shuriken along with my clone, making sure to intersperse the real ones with the fake. I jumped up into the tree leaves immediately afterward, drawing a kunai and going utterly still as I waited for an indication that my attacker knew where I was. The umbu was still jumping through the air when he must have heard the whirling of the shuriken. He ignored the clone I left up there and twisted himself around to land against the tree branch and block the shuriken. My eyes widened in surprise when he failed to distinguish the real from the fake as several grazed past his arms drawing blood. Instead of going after the clone like I'd hoped, however, he stilled and searched for my location. So much for ambushing him. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Flashing through the signs for the substitution jutsu, I replaced myself with a leaf behind the rogue ninja's head, spinning in the air as I pumped chakra into my legs and aimed a kick for his neck, but he raised his arm at the last moment and blocked it. Before I lost all my momentum, I swung my arm around and attempted to impale his chest with my kunai, only to have my wrist caught. The umbu pushed my leg away and before I could do anything he swung his kunai downward. Blood splashed against the tree branches and a searing pain spread across my side. The umbu let go of me and I tumbled helplessly to the ground. I landed harshly on my back with an anguished grunt. My hand went to my side and pressed against the wound, sending sharp jolts of agony through my body, but I kept it there as it became slick with blood, knowing somewhere in the back of my mind that it was better than letting the blood flow freely. When I managed to turn my gaze back toward the umbu, I saw him leaping down from the tree and I hastily tossed my kunai at him, whimpering pathetically when the action only served to trigger another wave of pain as he easily blocked the knife with his own. He landed silently next to me and I tried to glare up at him, but it probably came out more like a grimace. There wasn't much point in trying to get away. I could barely move as it was, the pain in my side was too much. I couldn't fight back either. That was painfully clear. So when the umbu readied his kunai for what could only be the final blow, I just closed my eyes and waited. I just hope mommy won't miss me too much. But I knew it would only break her completely. No matter what she said, how distant she acted, I knew I was the only thing keeping her from really going off the deep end. But if I was going, there'd be no one left to take care of her. No one to bring her home when it got too late. No one to remind her to eat every day. No one to hold her and remind her that she wasn't alone when she was at her very worst. No one to keep her from wasting away. No. A seething rage took over as I thought of what would happen to mommy if I was gone. Chakra began to flood my body, wild and frenzied. It burned in my veins as it spread, but I hardly noticed. My hand shot out and caught the kunai mid-swing, the edge biting painfully into my palm. I yanked the umbu toward me, drawing out a surprised grunt. I closed my free hand into a fist and felt that searing chakra gather as I punched his chest with as much force as I could muster. He was sent flying across the clearing where he hit a tree with a loud crack and a pained groan. I stood across from him on all fours, an animalistic growl tearing from my throat. Chakra gathered in my hand and on my side, burning painfully but sealing the wounds all the same. I dashed forward, faster than I could ever remember being, claws that I only just realized I had extended. Moments before my claws raked his chest, he jumped to the side, but I pushed off against the tree and chased after him. The umbu reached for his pouch and drew out 2 handfuls of shuriken and tossed them at me, but before I could even think about dodging, I felt chakra building up in my chest and I released it in a furious roar. The shuriken were all knocked away by an unseen force and I continued unimpeded. I closed in easily and swiped both hands at his torso. Claws rent flesh and fabric as blood sprayed into the air, the umbu letting out a cry of pain. He fell to the ground, but I didn't give him a chance to recover. I landed on his chest and reached down to wrap my hands around his neck, snarling ferociously at his mask as my claws dug into his skin, drawing blood. The umbu grabbed my arms and tried to shake me loose, but I refused to let go, tightening my grip further and further until I felt and heard a crack. The umbu went utterly still and I finally relaxed. I let out a long breath, the unearthly chakra and rage fading with it. I shakily stood from the newly made corpse, taking slow, deep breaths, feeling more exhausted than I could ever remember being and soreness that seemed to reach my bones. Closing my eyes briefly, I concentrated for a moment and reached for my newfound sensing abilities. I pushed my chakra out around me and awareness flooded me. That twisted chakra I had felt before was gone, as was nearly every other chakra signature in the area. There was still a handful left, but even those were swiftly vanishing one by one. But more importantly, there was no one else in my immediate vicinity. And distinct lack of chakra from the body just below me. He was definitely dead. Was that it? I opened my eyes and found myself staring at the body. I had just killed someone. Ended a life. I thought it would be more. I don't know. I'd thought about how I would react to killing for the first time. Of course, I was training to be a ninja, after all. I thought I might have been horrified. That was most people's reaction after all. Hell, Jonin-sensei in the Leaf had a whole protocol in place to deal with a genin's first kill. I thought I might have been disgusted, but carry one regardless, simply taking it as a fact of life as a ninja. I'd even thought I might have enjoyed it in some way, perhaps taking some dark pleasure in taking one's life. I didn't think I would, but I figured it was possible. It was just one of those things where you just don't know how you'll react until it happens. But I didn't expect to feel nothing. To not care in the slightest one way or another. I mean, I'm glad he's dead. But just because it meant I was still alive. I didn't particularly care that it was me who killed him. Maybe I was in shock. That was certainly possible. Maybe it just hadn't hit me yet, what I'd done. Maybe it was the mask. With the mask covering his face, it was almost like it wasn't even a human I killed. Morbidly curious, I knelt down and carefully peeled the animal mask off his face. Dark hair. Pale skin. Cold, dark eyes, staring unblinkingly at me. I blinked back. Sighing, I stood back up, my knees wobbling slightly from the ache. Well, whatever. I was still alive, that's all that really matters. I started heading back home, each shaky step becoming surer as I walked. I was curious about what was happening over in that clan district, so I pushed my chakra out as I walked, keeping an eye, so to speak, on the area. Seeing with my chakra was weird. It wasn't really seeing, not in the traditional sense. It was sort of like echolocation. My chakra traveled out in all directions until it made contact with another source of chakra, where it burned brightly in my senses, making it easy to pinpoint them in my surroundings, as long as it wasn't overshadowed by another, even brighter source, that is. The point is, the clan district was practically devoid of chakra sources by now. I still wasn't sure which clan it was, I was only even vaguely sure it was a clan district at all. I didn't exactly make it a habit of wandering around those areas. There were only 4 sources of chakra that I could sense, 3 grouped close together, 1 some distance away, but closing in slowly. Sometime later, 2 of the 3 sputtered out abruptly and not long afterward the last 2 met. I realized I'd made it home and I walked inside and headed for the washroom to wash out the blood and sweat from my body, still watching the 2 auras intently. The larger of the 2 spiked suddenly and the other seemed to wilt in response but didn't quite fade. When the larger started to move away, out toward the edge of the village, the smaller seemed to revitalize quite suddenly and chase after the other. They stopped near the edge for a brief moment, before the smaller faded once again, still alive, but dimmer than ever. The larger left then, moving away from the village, farther and farther at an astonishing speed until I couldn't sense it any longer. Humming in thought as I lowered myself into the tub, I wondered what that was all about. I opened my eyes, only just realizing I'd had them closed for several minutes now. Well, I'm sure I'd figure out what happened tomorrow. Mass murder was sure to light one hell of a spark in the rumor mill, after all. Absently rubbing the blood and bits of flesh out from under my fingernails, I wondered something else. How the hell did I beat that Umbu guy? I mean, I knew what I did, but not a clue how. I couldn't hold out against him for more than a second in open combat, then all of a sudden I was kicking his butt. And what was up with my chakra? It had felt like liquid fire running through my veins, and yet at the same time, it was so incredibly empowering. I didn't even have to direct it, it just seemed to do what I needed it to do, almost like it had a mind of its own. A shiver of fear ran down my spine as I thought of the implications of that. I knew the seal was designed so I could draw on the Nine-Tails chakra if I needed it, though now that I thought of it, I wasn't really sure how I knew that. No one ever explained it to me, and I knew next to nothing about Fuinjutsu. I just knew it was something I could do, but I didn't think the fox could push its chakra into me on its own accord. What was stopping it from doing so at worst possible of moments? If I just suddenly started emitting the fox's chakra in the middle of the village, who knows what could happen? Unless it actually couldn't. After all, if it could push its chakra out whenever, then why stop doing so in the first place? Why not keep pushing until it was all out, and thus, freeing itself? Besides, I was pretty angry at the time, livid, in fact, when I used its chakra, all the way up until I killed the Umbu. I felt a sudden rush of satisfying vindication at the thought. How dare he try to hurt mommy by killing me? Since the fox's chakra was basically rage incarnate, I suppose it wasn't too much of a stretch to say my emotions aligned enough to start subconsciously pulling on it. If so, then maybe it wasn't as worrying as I'd thought. I hardly ever got angry, after all. Frustrated, sure, but never really angry. Especially to that extent. Climbing out of the bath, I ended up getting ready to go to bed. It was fairly late and, normally, I'd be getting ready to head out and look for mommy, but I was just too exhausted and sore. Instead, as I lay in bed, I extended my senses one last time and watched mommy as she moved around the village, letting her chakra soothe me to sleep, distantly wondering what she was with the Hokage for. I woke up early, like always, my internal alarm clock not allowing otherwise, despite how tired I was. Yawning, I attempted to rub the sleep from my eyes, feeling an ache in my arms as I did so. That was weird. I'd never woken up sore before. In fact, I'd hardly ever had to deal with soreness in the first place. My muscles healed nearly as fast as I'd damaged them, at least, when exercising. I typically only felt sore when I really pushed myself, and even then, only for an hour or so at most afterward. Getting up out of bed and dressing myself proved that, yes, I did indeed ache all over. I even had a headache, which sucked massively. Last time I had a headache was when I was trying to learn tree jumping and horribly misjudged a leap, hitting face first into a tree trunk, resulting in both a headache and a nosebleed. I tried to ignore the ache in my body as I climbed downstairs and started making breakfast, but it honestly wasn't easy. I was used to short, intense pains, not small lingering ones. And it reminded me far too much of when I was younger. Too small and helpless to do anything but cry out as the pain racked my body, desperate for relief, but not knowing anything else. Shaking my head from those gloomy memories as I finished up breakfast, I made a plate to bring up to mommy. Halfway upstairs, I remembered what I learned to do yesterday and pushed out my chakra to see if she was home since I didn't bring her back last night, frowning when I couldn't feel her chakra. Extending my sense further, I tried to pinpoint where she was. It was almost startling how simple it was to wash my chakra over the village, monitoring the comings and goings of with relative ease, though it wasn't like I could tell one chakra signature from another. I didn't know anyone well enough for that. But I knew mommy's chakra intimately, and it was very distinctive too, so it should have been easy to find her. So I panicked slightly when I couldn't feel her anywhere, before remembering a small detail from yesterday. Didn't she meet up with the Hokage? Was she out on a mission? It was possible. Mommy was technically retired, but, really, there was no such thing as a retired ninja. Inactive was probably a better term. She wasn't given any missions unless something came up that required her specific set of skills or just particularly important came up. But what would call for her to leave the village? The only thing important enough to warrant calling on her that happened recently that I could think of was all those people dying yesterday, but I didn't see how she could help with that, other than with finding the killer. Duh. Mommy probably had the best sensing abilities in the village, maybe the only one, beyond basic chakra sensing. Pair her up with an Inazaka, or a Hyuga, and you'd have a great attacking team. I just hoped she'd come back okay. Whoever could murder an entire clan in a single night had to be incredibly strong. I knew Mommy was strong too, but, well, I'd never seen it. I felt guilty just thinking that, but it was true. I'd only ever seen her at home, and her home life wasn't. Well. Anyway, if Mommy wasn't in the village, chances were she's on a mission, so as I went back to the kitchen to eat breakfast, I resigned myself to not seeing her for a few days. When I finished up, I went outside to wander around the village to see if I could find out what happened last night. It wasn't hard, everyone was talking about it. The Uchiha had been killed. All of them. Every man, woman, and child, all except one. The clan head's youngest daughter, Uchiha Sasuke. No one could really say who did it, though, or why. Not yet, at least. I'm sure once Mommy got back, we'd know who it was. To be honest, I was pretty amazed. The Uchiha were no joke, they were often considered the most powerful clan in the village, and there were many heated debates over who was stronger, them and the Hyuga. For someone to take out every single one of them, even under the cover of night, was seriously impressive. I just wondered why they left Sasuke alive. We were technically unofficial cousins. I say technically because we've only actually met 2 or 3 times, and that was years ago, but for whatever reason, our moms wanted us to be best of friends and set up a few play dates for us. It didn't go so well. I got jealous whenever she got too close to Mommy and, funnily enough, she did the same whenever I got too close to her older brother, Itachi, so we just spent the whole time clinging to our respective partners and glaring at each other. But then I started getting more independent, and Mommy started getting worse, and Aunt Mikoto stopped visiting altogether, so I never saw her again. She probably didn't even remember me. Not that I minded. She was a total brat. I let out a sigh as I lost interest in the subject, wincing slightly as the ache in my body flared. Nothing interesting would turn up until Mommy returned, so I decided to just go and train. I was halfway to my usual haunting grounds when I halted in my tracks, blinking in realization. That corpse was probably still there. And I really didn't want to get caught hauling it elsewhere, so I turned on my heel to find another place to train. 5 days passed before Mommy returned to the village, and I trained relentlessly in the meantime to mask the creeping loneliness that came from her absence. It's true that I hardly saw her throughout the day, but I still saw her. For her to disappear entirely was hard. So I distracted myself by breaking trees and shattering rocks, and more than a few bones. My body still ached with soreness as well. I wasn't sure why, but I could only assume it was a side effect of using the Ninetales chakra. After this long, I was starting to get worried, but I think the soreness was starting to lessen, so I'd wait a little longer until I attempted to bring it up. I knew the moment when Mommy came back. I'd been periodically checking up on the village with my new sensing abilities ever since she left to see if she'd returned, so when, in the middle of training, I felt her chakra on the very edge of my senses, I stopped everything I was doing as my face broke into a huge grin and I bolted back home. I wanted to head straight for her, but she would be going to the Hokage first for a debriefing, and interrupting would be inappropriate. Despite how much I didn't care, I also didn't think it would go down so well for anyone involved, Mommy included, so I went home to wait for her instead. I sat down in front of the main entrance, keeping a careful watch on her chakra as she met with the Hokage, a happy smile on my face. My brow furrowed slightly when I noticed something weird about Mommy's chakra. It was fluctuating strangely. Compressing and pulsing, twisting and warping in strange ways. Then it'd stop for a moment, then start again a short moment later. It reminded me of when I did my chakra meditation, but far more complex and precise. At some point, it stopped completely, and shortly after she started heading my way. Waiting impatiently as she moved closer and closer, when she finally came into view I shot up to my feet, smiling widely at her. She looked beautiful. Breathtaking. But also tired. She was in her Jonin uniform, which I had never seen her in before. Her long red hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, two long strands of hair framing her face, falling past her shoulders. The flak jacket left her arms bare, showing the dirt and mud smeared on her skin. Her head was bowed, not looking where she was going. Her eyes were bruised, she must not have gotten much sleep, and there was dirt smudged across her face. When she heard me stand, she looked up, and the moment her eyes met mine she visibly winced, stopping in her tracks. My smile faltered somewhat, but I managed to keep it on my face. I so desperately wanted to run into her arms, but I knew doing so just might make it worse. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, apparently steadying herself, then opened them again and looked back at me. Her mouth twisted upward slightly in a sad smile. "Naruto," she said softly. I smiled wider in response, tilting my head slightly at the way her chakra shifted as she said my name. She raised two fingers and gestured for me to come to her. "Come here, sweetie." Eyes widening in surprise and blushing at the unexpected endearment, I didn't hesitate to rush forward. I almost thought I was dreaming when she knelt down to catch me and pick me up, but no dream could match the warmth of her arms or the softness of her skin. She wrapped me in a desperate sort of hug and I circled my little arms around her neck, holding her as close as possible. She was shaking slightly, I noticed, and when I heard a small sniff, I realized she was crying. My heart clenched at the thought and I held her tighter, wanting to make her pain go away, but not knowing what I could do. After what felt like an eternity, yet not nearly long enough, Mommy pulled away slightly to look at me, wiping tears from her eyes as she did so. "You're all sweaty," she said, her tone deceptively light. "Were you training?" There it was again. Her chakra was acting weird again, bending and twisting suddenly before stopping abruptly. It was almost like. I nodded in answer, focusing a bit more on her chakra to try and confirm my theory. She smiled wider, just a bit. It was such a pretty smile, it made my heart beat faster. "Ah, that's good," she said as she moved into the house with me. "Well, I guess we're both dirty then, huh? Would you like to take a bath together, Muzum?" I smiled at her, both because of the offer and because I was pretty sure I figured out what her chakra was doing. It was talking. Or rather, Mommy was talking with her chakra. It was twisting itself into several distinct, intricate shapes, quickly shifting from one form to another to match each word she spoke. I just didn't know why. I hadn't felt anyone else do anything remotely like this when they spoke, so it had to be an Uzumaki thing, which made more sense the more I thought about it. No one could naturally sense chakra as well as an Uzumaki could. Had they created their own language just out of shaping their chakra? I certainly seemed possible, and it would be something Mommy learned back in her childhood when she still lived in Yuzu. It might have been something she did to remember her old home, even if no one else felt it. Eventually, it would just become a habit. Realizing I hadn't actually answered her question, I eagerly nodded my head. I made sure to pay close attention to everything else she said from here on out, determined to learn this language of hers. She chuckled a little at my obvious enthusiasm but headed for the washroom nonetheless, setting me down when she stepped inside. She started undressing me, and then herself, my cheeks burning as she did so, then started washing me. She didn't really need to, not that I minded, I could do it myself, so I guessed she must have just wanted to. Mommy was quiet as she sponged down my body. That wasn't exactly unusual, but we rarely took baths together, and when we did it was usually because she was rather inebriated. And therefore talkative. So having her just sitting there, staring at my body while she scrubbed me down was, weirdly intimate. I felt unreasonably nervous and my heart was pounding even harder than when that Umbu tried to kill me. I couldn't even look her in the eye without my stomach attempting somersaults, and everywhere else was bare skin, so that wasn't much better, and I ended up just awkwardly looking off the side as she touched me, my face beet red. "Naruto," Mommy said suddenly, startling me slightly. I turned my head to look fully at her, ignoring the way her gorgeous eyes sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach. She paused, hesitating, like she was trying to figure how to word whatever she was going to say. How are classes at the academy going? Are you making any friends? I blinked. Then I blinked again, wondering once again if I was dreaming. Mommy never showed much interest in my life before, why was she asking now? I mean, it made me ludicrously happy, but I didn't understand what brought it on. I also didn't know how to tell her that I barely attended the academy and that I wasn't interested in making friends, even if they didn't all think I was some sort of menace, so I just sort of shrugged my shoulders, feeling oddly disappointed that I couldn't give her more. Mommy's face fell and I felt a painful crushing sensation in my chest. "Oh," she said. "I see." She fell silent for several long minutes after that and I felt irrationally angry with myself for making her sad. Despite that fact I didn't know what else I could have done. She moved behind me to wash my back, which was simultaneously easier to handle and disappointing. I loved looking at her, no matter how strange it made me feel. "You spend a lot of time in the forest," Mommy said suddenly. It wasn't a question, and I found myself surprised she knew that before, remembering she could probably sense me as well as I could sense her, maybe even better. It made me wonder why she didn't seem to know I hardly went to my classes, but I discarded it as unimportant. "Do you spend all that time training?" She sounded strangely worried for some reason, but I nodded anyway, turning my head slightly to see her reaction. She was frowning, and I floundered as I tried to figure out what I said wrong. "Don't you think that's a bit much?" I turned to face her a little more fully, blinking up at her in confusion. "I only trained in my free time, which was, well, all the time really, but it's not like I had anything else to do." Mommy stared intensely at me for a moment. I didn't really know why, but it made me blush nonetheless. Eventually, she just let out a small sigh and said, "Never mind." I felt confused and worried I had upset her even more somehow. But I had no idea how, and I pondered it uselessly while she continued washing me. "There," she said when she finally finished. "All clean. Why don't you go and soak? I'll join you in a moment." I nodded dutifully, stepping over to the tub and lowering myself into it, letting the hot water wash over me. I sighed in contentment, closing my eyes briefly in to enjoy the feeling before opening them back up and turning to look at Mommy, leaning against the edge of the tub to watch her. It was a little easier now that she wasn't so close. I felt a little perverted just staring at her, but it was worth it just to see her amazing body. Seeing the water trail down her body and the suds stick to her skin as she washed was bliss. I just wished I could do something about that sad look on her face. The way she stared at nothing, her mind obviously elsewhere, paying only the barest attention to her surroundings. It made my heart ache when I saw her like that. She did notice me staring eventually. She wasn't paying much attention, but I wasn't exactly being discreet. She smiled at me, a teasing smirk, and puffed out her substantial chest. "See something you like, Musum?" My blush worsened immeasurably and I sunk into the water down to my nose in a vain attempt to hide my embarrassment. Mommy laughed, light and airy, and I relished the sound, even if it was caused at my expense. "There's no need to hide. It's not like I mind." Then her smile faded and her despondent look returned. "Even if I don't deserve it?" I frowned, pulling my head out of the water to look at her. Mommy saw my frown and waved her hands frantically. "Ah, don't mind gloomy old me, Musum. You don't need to bother yourself with dash." I stood suddenly, startling Mommy into silence. Stepping out of the bath, I walked over to her and threw my arms around her neck, pulling her into a tight hug. "And Naruto?" I shook my head, pulling her closer, pressing my body against her in a way that made my blush triple in intensity, but I didn't let go. I rested my head against her shoulder, making myself comfortable as I waited for her to hug me back. And she did, after a moment. Slowly, tentatively, her arms reached around me to hold me against her, before tightening them. Another moment passed as we embraced, and then Mommy shook as she let out a sob, then another, before devolving into a mess of tears. I held her close as she cried, not daring to pull away, to let her think for a single moment that she was alone. When, after an indeterminable amount of time, the tears finally slowed and the sobs that racked her body halted, I pulled away, not much, just enough to press my forehead against hers and stare into her violet eyes. I gave her a soft smile and reached up to rest my hands against her face, brushing the last of her tears away with my thumbs. Mommy stared back with sad eyes, one of her hands moving to rest on top of my own. She spoke, hiccuping slightly. "You're so good to me. Even though I'm, like this," she said, her breath shaky. "I don't deserve you." I shake my head, denying the statement. She deserves everything I can give and far, far more. It didn't matter how broken she was, I'd do whatever it took to make her whole again. "I love you so much," she said hopelessly, and I can't stop my heart from skipping a beat at her words even when she says them so miserably, but she continued, her voice increasingly desperate, tears breaking through once again. "Please don't leave me. You're all I have left." "Never," I thought to myself as I stared into her eyes, wondering if she could see the promise in mine. I closed them a moment later and leaned in slowly, my heart beating furiously, and ever so softly pressed my lips to hers. I felt her go stock-still, but I kept still, our lips locked together for a moment, and then another until I felt her body relax and her lips begin to move against mine. So impossibly soft and so wonderfully sweet. We pulled away from each other moments later, before I could even process the taste. I looked up at her shyly, still in ecstasy. I could only imagine how red my face must have been. She looked similar, her cheeks tinted pink as she brought 2 fingers up to her lips. Her eyes wide in disbelief. And then she smiled, her eyes lighting up, and I was left breathless because I had never seen her so alive. "So bold," she said softly, but I could hear the happiness in her voice and I'd never loved her more. She looked down at me and I could see the love on her face, clear as the morning sky, and not clouded by endless grief and sorrow. She pulled me close then, wrapping me in another hug, fierce and gentle, filled with care and warmth, and I hugged her back just as passionately. "Thank you," she said, adoration coating her voice, and I smile wider than I've smiled before because even though I know it won't last forever, that eventually, she'll slip back into her depression, for the first time ever she'd actually heard me, and, maybe, that first step toward healing had finally been taken. I don't know why, but something about the full moon made me strangely restless. It didn't really make any sense, especially because I honestly found it rather beautiful. So big and round, hanging high in the dark night sky, a shimmering orb sending soft rays of sliver light down upon the world, set aglow by its calm aura. It was entrancing, but equally I couldn't help but feel oddly unsettled while looking at it, for no discernible reason. Like a bug had wormed its way into my gut and started biting a pit of anxiety into my stomach. Yet despite all that, I couldn't seem to stop myself from climbing to the roof of our house every month and just to stare at the thing, hour after hour as the night grew cold, watching as it leisurely traveled through the stars. At times I imagined the moon was watching me back. But that was just a flight of fancy, conjured up from the loneliness I seldom admitted to. No, I had no idea why the moon brought forth such conflicting emotions within me, but regardless I had much more important things that stole my attention, like the pitiful progress I was making in regards to my training. I had more or less stalled. I wasn't getting any better and it was starting to really tick me off. If anything, I've actually gotten worse because I couldn't even do the clone technique anymore. I had too much chakra now. Ever since I used the Nine Tails chakra that one time, the seal must have loosened somehow because it had started leaking more chakra than it ever had before. It's why I was so sore all the time afterward. My coils were being pumped with far more of the fox's chakra than they were used to and it took a while for them to grow and adjust. It also meant my chakra reserves were almost double what they used to be, and as a result, I couldn't make clones anymore. I kept putting far too much chakra into them, but I just couldn't use any less. It was like trying to pick up a single grain of sand from the desert, it just wasn't possible, and how ridiculous was that? Who ever heard of having too much chakra? Not only that, but my chance of passing the academy in a year had officially passed. I'm not quite sure how, but it seems with the big, important final exam, the teachers actually put effort into being discreet when failing me. When I got my test back, sporting a big fat F, it didn't even look like the same one I took. It was my handwriting all right, but the questions were different from the ones I remembered. Nothing too different, but enough to count. When did the Third Great Ninja War end? Was replaced to say Second Great Ninja War. What was the name of the second Hokage? Changed to ask about the first instead, stuff like that. Things that made the answer I put down still make sense, but were incorrect. I peeked at some of the other students, and they all had the same test that I got back, so I guess they must have given me a different one to take. Though I'm not sure how they transferred my answers to the real test. Regardless, it meant another year at the academy. Or another year of skipping classes, rather. The academy grated heavily on my nerves, filled with bumbling children and idiot teachers. I couldn't stand it. But if they were willing to go so far just to keep me from passing, I need to find another way to learn. It's not like I particularly wanted to be a ninja. Not in the serve for the glory of Konoha sense at least. I couldn't care less about that, I just wanted to be strong, and becoming a genin meant having a jonin sensei. But at this rate, I'll have to find someone else to teach me. I don't think I could survive another 3 years at the academy. I let out a sigh at the thought, looking down from the sight of the shining moon to stare at the roof I was sitting on. Maybe I could ask Mommy. After all, lately, she's been, well, not better, but around. She still drank herself into a stupor most of the time, but instead of bar hopping until after midnight, she tended to just sit around at home, drinking from bottles. I honestly don't know if that's better or worse in terms of parenting, but I still loved it regardless. Well, no, I didn't like that she drank herself into oblivion, but if she was going to do it, I'd much prefer it to be at home. It's not like she's an angry drunk, not around me, at least. Mostly she just, sort of, sat there, watching me silently with an empty look on her face. Either that or she gushed drunkenly over me, squishing my cheeks together and pulling me into tight hugs. I wasn't going to lie and say I didn't enjoy the attention, but it would mean much more to me if she did it while sober. Still, it wasn't too late right now, she probably wasn't too far into her drinking. I could try and get her to teach me something. At the very least, it couldn't hurt to ask. I stood from the roof and hopped down to the ground, sending chakra to my legs to break the fall before entering the house. It took me a moment to find her just because she wasn't where I expected her to be. Rather than drinking on the couch like I expected, I found her in the kitchen making some onigiri. It was unexpected enough that I actually paused in the doorway to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But no, there she was, her pretty hair tied back as she patted together the little rice balls. I just didn't understand why. Or for who. There were too many for one person, enough for 3, really. I supposed she could just be making them for later, but Mommy wasn't really once for foresight. I felt my insides twisting painfully as I thought of Mommy making food for someone else. She must have noticed my presence, for a moment later her head shot up and she smiled in my direction. "Naruto!" she exclaimed with some excitement in her voice, and it made smile curiously back at her. "You're just in time. I'm almost done here, help me pack these up." She gestured to a stack of bento boxes sitting next to her on the counter. I nodded and dutifully set about packing the onigiri into the boxes, though I still wasn't sure what they were for. Luckily, Mommy continued. "I had the greatest idea earlier while I was... well, earlier," she told me rather excitedly, if somewhat awkwardly. It made me blink in surprise since she rarely got so worked up. "I figured since the Uchiha, She trailed off for a moment, her eyes unfocusing as she seemed to lose herself in memories, obviously thinking about Aunt Mikoto. Even if neither of us had seen her for over a year before she died, Mommy still considered her to be her best friend and losing her hurt. But she surprised me once again, for after a moment she shook her head and focused back onto whatever it was she wanted to say. Anyway, I figured Sasuke must be lonely, so I thought we'd pay her a visit and have dinner together, she finished with a smile. I blinked up at her a couple of times, wondering where that idea came from. I really didn't care if Sasuke was lonely or not, and Mommy wasn't really usually so considerate. I felt irrationally jealous it was being wasted on some brat, but if Mommy was feeling unreasonably generous, then I wasn't going to do anything to disoblige her. I couldn't help but think it wasn't much of a dinner, though, as I glanced down at the onigiri. Apparently my unenthused reaction caught Mommy's attention and she frowned. "You do remember Sasuke, right?" she asked. I nodded in affirmation, but I was unsure what else to add. I got the feeling that Mommy expected me to be worried about the girl or something, but Sasuke's feelings weren't even remotely on my radar. So I elected to just finish packing up the onigiri in silence. Good. Mommy said awkwardly, evidently as at a loss for words as I was. A few more moments passed in silence and Mommy finished making the last of the onigiri and helped me pack them into the last bento box. "Right then, let's get going. I think she's still." She paused for a moment, her eyes glazing over, but not like they usually did when she was lost in herself, more like she was just focusing on something else. I felt her chakra pulse for just a moment and realized she must be sensing for Sasuke's chakra. "Yep," Mommy said a moment later, confirming my thoughts. "Still in the training grounds. I swear, that girl's almost as bad as you." I didn't really know what she meant by that, so I just picked up the bento boxes and followed Mommy out of the house. We stepped outside and Mommy looked at me for a moment, hesitating for some reason. Then she grabbed the boxes out of my hand and I frowned in protest, but she either didn't notice or ignored it. My frown quickly turned to amazement, however, when she brought out a scroll from somewhere, I don't know. One moment there was nothing in her hand, the next there was, and dropped the boxes, but before they could even begin to fall to the ground she quickly unfurled the scroll beneath them, made a one-handed ram sign, and sealed them away with little more than a puff of smoke. "There. That's better," she said, stuffing the scroll back wherever the hell she grabbed it from. She was about to start moving when she saw my slack-jawed expression and faltered. "What?" It wasn't all that amazing in the grand scheme of things, I'll admit it, but she did it with a speed and dexterity that I hadn't seen from her before, and it impressed me. So I just smiled brightly at her and shook my head. Mommy began hesitantly. When I didn't make another move, she continued. "Right, well. Let's get going." She jumped suddenly, hopping up into the dense canopy of tree branches above them. I blinked in surprise at the action, then quickly followed after her. Tree hopping was a staple of Konoha ninja, but I had really only practiced it enough to keep myself from falling flat on my face, and Mommy kept a much quicker pace than I was used to. I did my best to keep up with her, but I could only guess as to how much she held back. Eventually, the trees cleared and we hopped along the rooftops for a short time, which failed to provide any relief for my limbs as Mommy merely picked up the pace. I'm not entirely sure she noticed I was struggling to keep up, but I was determined to keep pace with her regardless. Thanks to our quick pace, however, it wasn't long before we came upon another patch of trees and entered a clearing not far into it. Mommy came to a sudden halt up in the branches on the edge of the clearing and I sat on a nearby branch, finally giving my legs a chance to rest. I resisted the urge to pant, instead taking slow, deep breaths so I wouldn't appear winded. Maybe it was somewhat childish, but I didn't want Mommy to think something as simple as a bit of a run would tire me out. Mommy wasn't looking at me, though. Instead she was gazing into the clearing with a faraway look in her eye, and I followed her gaze to see a girl standing in the middle of it. I would never, ever, in a million years admit it aloud, but my first thought was that she was incredibly cute. Not at all like the chubby, fussy kid I remembered. Her short, black hair was almost as messy as mine was, and even the dirt and grime covering her pale skin, likely from hours of training, didn't really detract from how adorable she looked as she scrunched up her face in a concentrated pout, holding 2 handfuls of kunai out in front of her. Quite suddenly, she jumped into the air, spinning and twirling as she tossed the kunai out towards the targets that dotted the clearing. I watched as several kunai collided midair, altering their trajectory only for each to land dead center in each target, some of which were somewhat obscured by trees or other foliage, before landing with only a pant. That was, actually impressive. I wanted to say that I could do the same. But I'd never actually tried to do something like that before, so I wasn't sure. It gave me a new training idea, at least. Sasuke, though, didn't look satisfied. She was scowling something fierce and stomped over to a nearby boulder and went around to the other side. I hopped over to another tree to get a better view and saw yet another target that was entirely out of sight from the previous angle. She had even managed to hit that one, though it was a bit off-center. Sasuke's face twisted into loathing when she saw it. I heard her mutter. Then, abruptly, she lurched for the kunai and yanked it out of the target and began stabbing it repeatedly, screaming. It, over and over again. Her sudden outburst took me by surprise, but only a little. I knew how frustrating training could be, trying to perfect that one move so you could move on to the next. I just usually broke some trees. I guess Sasuke preferred to stab things. Either that or her whole family being massacred recently could have messed with her emotional state. Sasuke-chan, someone called out suddenly, and both me and Sasuke jumped slightly. I turned my head to the sound and Sasuke whirled around, holding out her kunai defensively to see mommy strolling into the clearing. "Who the hell are you?" Sasuke demanded, and I frowned at the language she was using. Not that I had a problem with it in and of itself, but she was directing it toward mommy. "It's your Aunt Kushina," mommy replied. "Do you remember me?" From the way Sasuke's eyes narrowed in distrust, I figured she didn't. Mommy noticed too, and let out a sigh. "Well, how about my daughter Naruto? Do you remember her?" I really didn't expect her to, but a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes, though she still kept her guard up. "Naruto?" she repeated slowly. "Isn't she that weird little blonde kid who never speaks?" I was tempted to get offended at the description, but it wasn't exactly inaccurate, so I just let it go. Mommy seemed to get offended on my behalf though, which made me smile a bit, but again, it wasn't like Sasuke was wrong, so in the end she just let out another sigh. "Yes, her. I thought. Well, I thought the two of you could spend some time together. I think you two'd make good friends." I almost rolled my eyes. Mommy and Aunt Mikoto already tried to put us together and it didn't exactly turn out well. But I refrained. I didn't really get why Mommy wanted the two of us to spend time together, but if that's what she wanted then I'd do my best to get along. So I hopped down from my little hiding spot in the trees and landed soundlessly behind Sasuke. A little too soundlessly, apparently, since she didn't notice my arrival. Instead, she just shouted at Mommy, "I don't need to babysit some weak little crybaby. Where even is she, if you want us to be friends?" I felt my eye twitch at that. I'd almost forgotten why I didn't like her. She's such a brat. Mommy blinked at Sasuke. "She's right behind you." Sasuke jerked her head around and let out a startled yelp which made me snort and toss the kunai in her hand straight for my head. I caught it with ease, and Sasuke scowled at me. I slipped my finger through the ring on the end of the handle and idly spun it around, smirking just a little smugly at her. Sasuke's scowl deepened and she took a single step toward me before Mommy called out again. "Girls." The two of us glanced at Mommy looking tired. "Please, just look." I made dash, she grimaced then, and I guessed she just realized that onigiri wasn't much of a dinner. "Some snacks. Why don't we all just have a little picnic, or something?" I shrunk back at her tired tone, feeling guilty. I just said I would try to get along with Sasuke, and here I was antagonizing her. I nodded lightly in acquiescence and started walking toward Mommy when Sasuke spoke up again. No way. I turned to scowl at her and Mommy frowned. Why not? She asked. Why should I? You two just showed up out of nowhere and expect me to go along with whatever nonsense you say? I don't have time for this. I need to train. Then she gave me a glare. And I don't make friends with weaklings. Now go away. With that, she turned around and started to gather up all the kunai she'd been throwing. I looked at Mommy to see a despondent look on her face. I frowned at the sight. It made me want to go beat the crap out of the other girl, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I just lightly grabbed hold of Mommy's hand and tried to give her a reassuring smile. She just looked at me with the same sad look until something flashed behind her eyes, like she'd just had an idea, and a small smile began to tug at her lips. I watched curiously as he turned back to the dark-haired girl. Sasuke-chan, she called. I said go away, came the reply. How about this then? You and Naruto have a little spar. If you win then we'll leave and won't bother you again. If Naruto wins, then you have to be friends. My eyes widened slightly and a grin began to stretch across my face. Maybe I would get to knock the girl around after all. Sasuke gave them an annoyed look from the other side of the clearing. That's stupid. There's no way she can beat me. Just leave already. Mommy gave a playful smile. Fine, fine. We'll come back tomorrow and ask you then. No. Sasuke exclaimed. Don't come back at all. Sorry, but you haven't won the spar. That's the rules. Ugh. Fine. I'll kick her ass and then will you leave me alone? Of course, Mommy said with a smirk. But only if you win. Sasuke let out a snort as she began approaching me. There's no way I'd lose to someone so tiny, she said, conveniently ignoring that they were about the same size. Prove it then, Mommy said, jumping back into the trees to watch. My face was stretched into a full-blown grin at this point, eager to beat the snot out of the arrogant kid in front of me. I still had the kunai from earlier and held it loosely in my hand as Sasuke broke out into a run towards me. Apparently she was looking to end it quickly and threw a punch straight for my head the moment she was close enough. I smirked as she tilted backward, avoiding the punch while at the same time extending my leg for her to trip over. The sudden obstruction took her by surprise and her eyes widened as she lurched forward suddenly and fell to the ground, barely catching herself on the way down. To her credit, she rolled to her feet quickly and glared at my smirk. You got lucky, she bit out. My smirk grew wider, and I could tell it pissed her off. She threw herself at me once more with two quick jabs that I easily dodged. I heard her let out a tch. My eyes narrowed slightly as another fist rapidly approached my head, too fast for me to dodge. I raised my arm and parried it instead, but almost immediately another fist was heading my way. I parried that one as well, but Sasuke turned out to be faster than I thought and I saw her leg already fast approaching a collision with my side. Instead of blocking, I twisted and caught her leg with my hand, grunting a bit at the impact. Sasuke's eyes widen in surprise and I give her another smirk, tossing her leg to the side and throwing her off balance before crashing my fist against her torso. Sasuke stumbles backward, coughing slightly and only just barely managing to keep on her feet. I wait for her to recover, still smirking smugly at her and twirling the kunai in my hand, and she glares fiercely at me. I see her hand flash and several kunai fly in my direction. I quickly grip my own kunai properly and dodge the first one, blocking the rest. Sasuke's already on me by then and our kunai clash together with a clang. Sasuke growls at me and pulls back, only to swing at me again. I block her again, but Sasuke's relentless, slashing and stabbing at every opportunity. Slowly, the smirk on my face was turning into a genuine smile. She was finally fighting seriously, and she was actually pretty good. I'd bet she could already make genin. She was fast, and deadly, one wrong move on my part and I could get seriously injured. But I didn't make any wrong moves. She was good, but I was better. All of her attacks were either dodged or parried, and I could see her getting increasingly frustrated until finally she extended just a little too far and I took the opening to land a harsh kick to her side. She cried out in pain and I had kicked her hard enough to send her flying. She landed roughly on the ground a couple of feet away, rolling twice as the momentum kept her moving. When she finally came to a stop, she hastily pushed herself up to her feet, her hair and clothes covered in grass and leaves, clutching her side, and sent me a scathing glare. If looks could kill, no doubt be dead right now. Sasuke's hands tightened to fists, her knuckles turning white and her whole body shook with rage. I eyed her warily, a little surprised at the sheer rage she was showing and almost expected her to charge at me again, but then, unexpectedly, she took a single, deep breath and seemed to calm herself down. "Fine," she grunted. "You're better than I thought." Then she sent me an arrogant smirk, much like the ones I'd been giving her, and added, "But you still won't be able to beat me." I snorted as she closed her eyes, taking several more deep breaths. I didn't know if she was just stupid or delusional, but I thought I'd made it pretty clear by now that I was better than her. I set myself in a defensive position and waited for her to regain her breath. Sasuke's eyes snapped open. Red. Black. Tomo, circling, spinning, twirling, dizzying. Pain erupts in my head and suddenly I'm careening face first toward the ground. I hastily caught myself at the last moment and flipped back up onto my feet and away from Sasuke, who somehow managed to appear right next to me. What the hell just happened? I press my hand against my head in an attempt to halt the throbbing, but it doesn't really work. I hold my kunai out front of me and glare at Sasuke as she smirks back at me, and then I see it. Her irises, previously solid black, were now blood red, with one black tomo in each lazily circling her pupils. The Sharingan. This might be bad. I had no idea how the Sharingan worked. Clans guarded their secrets closely, and all I've ever heard about it was likely exaggerated rumors that wouldn't help me. But if it could do even a fraction of the things I've heard, then this might not be as easy as I thought. "Well?" Sasuke said. "Ready to give up now?" My eyes narrowed in annoyance. Screw the rumors. I was going to kick her ass anyway. I ran forward, tossing my kunai ahead of me. Sasuke mirrored my movements and the kunai collided in mid-air moments before we did. I threw a punch at her head, but she avoided it and countered with a slash of another of her kunai. I jumped out of its path and aimed a kick at her side, but she blocked it with her arm and quickly thrust her kunai towards my torso. I knocked her wrist to the side, but by the time I realized Sasuke's leg was also rising, it's too late, and her foot was planted squarely in my chest. The wind was knocked clean out of me as I got sent flying backwards, landing on the ground several feet away. I try to regain my breath as I stumble back to my feet, but I notice several shuriken flying my way and I just barely manage to twist my body in time to avoid them, only for Sasuke to once again reappear in front of me, swinging her kunai. We exchange blows one again, but this time is markedly different. Sasuke's moves have changed, short and precise, not a movement wasted. She was already fast, but now she's almost impossible to keep up with. She blocks each and every one of my attacks with ease and it doesn't take long for me to realize that a frontal assault just isn't going to work anymore. It's almost like she can read my thoughts, and the moment I make a move she's already moving to block or dodge. I need to catch her off guard. Attack from a blind spot, or put her in a position where she can't move to protect herself in time. But that's easier said than done, and Sasuke refuses to let up. I already have my hands full avoiding all of her attacks, and I can't get away from her onslaught without exposing myself, something she'll be sure to take advantage of. But first I need to get rid of that kunai. Having to dodge all of her attacks just because she has a weapon and I don't is too annoying, and disarming her might give me some extra legroom. I stop any offensive altogether and focus on defense. Sasuke notices, of course, but that only encourages her to redouble her efforts, hitting faster and harder. I carefully dance around her blade until she makes a certain move, and I strike. as she thrusts her kunai forward to stab me and reach out to grab her wrist. I can see Sasuke realize what I'm going for at the last moment and try to pull her arm back, but by then it's too late. My fingers wrap tightly around her wrist and I twist her arm around as far as I possibly can. I hear Sasuke's painful intake of breath as she involuntarily releases the kunai just as I notice her foot approaching my head, but it's too late to avoid it and it crashes into my temple. For the second time pain ravages my head and it nearly debilitates me, but I take the chance to retaliate and knock Sasuke's other leg out from under her. She lets out a surprised yelp as she falls to the ground, but before I can capitalize on it she catches herself and jumps away from me. I don't chase after her, or rather I can't, as the throbbing pain in my head steals my attention for a moment. I shake my head in an attempt to focus, but all it really does is aggravate the pain. Why does she keep going for the head? Sasuke is standing a few feet in front of me, rolling her shoulder with an annoyed look on her face. Why are you so strong? She asks me seriously. Even the bigger kids have never been able to beat me, and that was before I awakened the Sharingan. And then you come out of nowhere and can stand against me after? I just shrug my shoulders. It's not like I do anything special. I just train a lot. Sure, having the 9 tails helped a little, but that was mostly just healing me up so I could get back to training. Sasuke scowled. Fine, then. Let's see what you can do against this. My eyes widen as she runs through a series of hand seals that I don't recognize. She finishes them before I even have time to react and inhales deeply. That's not good. I run through the seals for the substitution jutsu as a fireball springs from Sasuke's mouth and rushes toward me, and I can feel the heat brushing against my face as I finish, just in time to leave behind a well-roasted log instead of flesh. I reappear not far behind Sasuke and immediately rush her, but she hears me coming and cancels the fireball, twirling around to intercept me. What the hell? Sasuke exclaims as we clash. Was the substitution? Where did you learn that? I give her an incredulous look. Was she seriously asking me how I learned a basic, E-rank jutsu right after spewing a giant fireball? That shouldn't even be possible. Everything I'd read about nature transformation said that attempting such a thing at our age was virtually suicide. My incredulity must have shown on my face, for the next thing she spouted was, "Shut up. I just have had the chance to learn it yet, okay? We're not even old enough to enter the academy yet, so how did you learn it?" Luck, mostly, if I was being honest. If that one student hadn't been slacking off, I never would have learned it. Do it again, Sasuke suddenly demanded with a grin. Let me copy it. What? Copy what? The substitution? How? Why? My Sharingan, dumbass. It lets me copy jutsu. I couldn't see past the fireball, so show it to me so I can use it. My eyes widened at that information. Copy jutsu? That was so not fair. I wanted something like that. But also good to know. I wasn't going to just reveal one of my advantages in the middle of a fight, even if Sasuke seems to have forgotten that in her excitement. Her grin didn't fade, though, as I blocked another blow from her. Fine, then, she said. I'll just make you use it again. I grinned back challengingly at her even as I grabbed hold of her arm and attempted to toss her over my shoulder. Sasuke let out a surprised shout but managed to steady herself enough to kick me away before I could fully follow through, and I pulled back with a grunt. There was a pause as we stared at each other for a moment, pondering our next move, and I suddenly realized that I was enjoying myself immensely. I'd never been able to fight with someone on par with me, and I'd honestly never thought I would until I became a full-fledged ninja. Going toe-to-toe like this, trading blows with equal fervor, it was more fun than I ever expected. And if the matching grin she wore as we charged at each other once more indicated anything, then Sasuke was feeling the same way. I'm not really sure how long we fought. There was never really a time when it felt right to stop, so we just kept going, throwing punches and taking kicks until finally Sasuke was finally on her back, too exhausted to get back up and desperately gasping for air. I was standing over her, barely, hands on my knees and breathing just as hard, sweat pouring from both of us. I had won, technically, but it honestly didn't feel like much of a victory. As much as I didn't want to admit it, Sasuke was the teensiest bit better than me. Despite how well I did in the beginning, once she had activated her Sharingan I started taking more hits than I could dish out. If it wasn't for my stamina, I would have hit the ground a long time ago. "Alright," Sasuke said between breaths. "You're not that weak. I guess." I snorted involuntarily at her insistence on keeping up that arrogant attitude even as she lay on the ground at my feet. I made to lightly kick her arm, but the painful flare it caused had me crashing to the ground on my butt. Sasuke laughed at that, and I scowled at her, before kicking her for real now that I didn't have to worry about falling over. Ow. Okay. You're strong, alright? I'm sorry for calling you weak earlier, Sasuke said in response. My eyes widened slightly in surprise. I hadn't actually expected her to admit it, much less apologize for anything. She continued, pausing for a moment as she considered her words. I can't afford to slack off. And no one my age has ever matched up with me, so I just assumed. Sorry. I looked at her for a moment, looking for any insincerity, but she seemed entirely genuine. In truth, her statement hadn't even bothered me all that much to begin with beyond mere annoyance, but I nodded in acceptance anyway. Even if fighting with her was fun, it was nice to know that she wasn't always going to be a bratty kid outside of that. Right then, my stomach growled loudly, and I blushed in embarrassment as Sasuke let out another laugh. I thought about kicking her again, but decided it wasn't worth it and instead decided to look around for mommy since I knew she had food. But the only thing I saw was a blanket sat out near the edge of the clearing with the bento boxes set on top of it, and my heart sank as I realized that she was gone. Oh yeah, that person brought snacks, didn't she? I guess I'm pretty hungry too. What was her name again? Kuni, something? Sasuke looked at me, and saw my sorrowful expression. She followed my gaze to the meager little picnic set up, then looked back at me before sitting up, letting out a grunt of pain as she did so. I tried not to cry, I really did, but I was having so much fun until I noticed her absence and I couldn't stop my tears from welling up at the sharp contrast in emotions. Sasuke began hesitantly. She's your mom, right? I nodded slightly. There was a short pause, and then, do you love her? I didn't know what kind of question that was, but I nodded again anyway. I loved her more than life itself. I saw Sasuke's face scrunch up in thought out of the corner of my eye, and again I couldn't help but notice how cute she could be. It was an odd thought, but for some reason it made me feel a little better. I rubbed the tears away and turned to her more fully, watching her as she seemed to debate herself. Eventually she seemed to come to a decision and looked at me with an intensity that startled me for a moment. Alright, we can be friends. But only on one condition. I tilted my head curiously at her. As far as I was aware, the condition was me winning the spar, but I guess I didn't mind another as long as it wasn't too burdensome. Yet when she spoke again, her voice was gravely dark, and her black eyes once more bled into the red of her spinning Sharingan. One day, I'm going to kill you. I blinked at her, taken entirely aback. I wondered how I was supposed to respond to that, but I really had no idea. Kill me? How in the world was that conducive to friendship? Luckily Sasuke decided to explain, her gaze shifting to the side, one of her fingers reaching up and pulling at one of her lower eyelids. These eyes, they're incomplete. Weak, she spat out the last word, as if the very concept disgusted her. The only way to achieve their full strength is by murdering your closest friend. What the hell kind of bloodline was that? I was all for acquiring power, but to do so by murdering your closest friend? Only. I don't have any friends. I need to be strong, and wasting time with friends would only hold me back, even if that's the only way to obtain the Mangekyo. At least, that's what I thought. Her eyes turned back to me, the tomo twirling in her eyes. If it's you, though. Maybe you can help me get even stronger. I frowned a bit as I thought over her words. I didn't know what sort of powers would be unlocked by the Magnakyu or whatever, but they must be pretty incredible if she was so willing to kill over it. But if that's the case, why even tell me about it? Why not keep it a secret and cut my throat in my sleep sometime down the line? Sasuke frowned as well. I thought about not telling you. Keeping it to myself. But if I did that, it's all I would ever think about. Every night I'd go to sleep thinking about sinking a kunai into your chest, and you'd get suspicious in no time. In the end I don't think we'd even become real friends, and killing you wouldn't accomplish anything at all. It's better to just tell you the truth right away and get it over with, I think. That way there's no secrets. Nothing to get in the way of us. And, she looked away again, this time in what looked like embarrassment as her cheeks tinged red. I get the feeling you would understand. Like hell I did, I wanted to say, but then I saw the look on her face, and the turbulent storm of emotions roiling underneath. I need power. I refuse to be weak. I'll do anything to get it, but once I have it, I'll finally be a match for him. And then. So many emotions. Rage. Despair. Helplessness. Desperation. But one emotion dominated over all the others. One I knew all too well. A grin far too wide spread across Sasuke's face. Then we'll finally be together. Love. Pure, unbridled, desperate love poured from Sasuke, and I realized I did understand. He's perfect, you know, she breathed softly. So pretty. So kind. So strong. But there were all those awful people around, always pushing him around, telling him what to do, taking advantage of his kindness. I hated them so much I wished they'd all just drop dead. A strangled noise escaped her, like she was torn between laughing and crying. And then they did. Their corpses littered the streets, and their blood ran like a river. She laughed like the death of her clan was the greatest joke ever told, then abruptly stopped. She let out a heavy breath, visibly struggling to steady herself, yet a maddening grin remained on her face. Do you know why he spared me? She asked, but continued before I had the chance to respond, her fingers trailing the contours of her eye. Because for all the power the Mangekyo has, the more you use it, the more you begin to go blind. That's what he told me. But you can get around that. Her smile twisted into something sharper, something darker. All you need is to transplant the eyes of a close relative who also has the Mangekyo. Sasuke was lost in her own thoughts by now, and I could see the tips of her fingers digging dangerously into her eye socket. I wonder how it will feel when he plucks them from my head. Will he be gentle? Will he have proper tools on hand? Or will he just rip them straight out? She seemed enraptured by the idea, and a demented giggle escaped her lips. It will probably hurt a lot either way, won't it? I wonder if he'll kill me afterwards. I hope not. I hope he lets me stay. But even if he does, I don't mind. As long as I get to be with him in the end. I let her ramble, lost in her own head. Sasuke and I were more alike than I ever would have guessed. We both had people we loved and devoted ourselves to, and we'd both sacrifice anything and everything for them. The only difference was that Sasuke's brother had actually asked that of her. And she was willing. Utterly. In a way, I was envious. She had such a clear path set before her. She knew just what she needed to do in order to reunite with her loved one. Meanwhile I was stumbling around in the dark, desperately searching for an answer and finding none. What I would give for a clear way forward like her. But then again, I had mommy here in the village with me. If she were a missing nin like Itachi, forever out of my reach, I would go crazy too. In the end, there was really nothing to be said. She was right, I did understand her, probably better than anyone else ever could. So instead I just took her hand, her eyes snapping to me as I did so, as if she had forgotten I was there. Neither of us said anything as I pulled her up to her feet and over to the picnic Mommy had set out for us. It was just onigiri, but Mommy had made it herself, so I treasured every bite, and made sure Sasuke did the same. We parted ways afterwards, but I was already planning on meeting up with her again the next day. And such an odd feeling it was, looking forward to seeing someone who wasn't Mommy. But it wasn't unpleasant at all. No, not at all. I tried to shake my hand free of Sasuke's grasp, but her grip was ironclad. Any progress I made in freeing myself only resulting in her tightening it further without a care for my comfort. "Stop squirming," she shouted. "I'll break your arm if I have to, see if I won't." She totally would too, the jerk. I gave one last rebellious tug, but when her fingers tightened dangerously around my wrist, I reluctantly settled down and let her drag me awkwardly through the streets. "Honestly, I don't get why you're even acting like this. It's our first day at the academy. We're actually going to learn something useful. You should be excited." Unfortunately, Sasuke had yet to learn the cruel reality of the academy, and I hadn't found a good way to tell her. The two of our abilities went far beyond anything they taught at that embarrassment they called an education institute. It wasn't even close. The spars held at the academy were nothing like what Sasuke and I got up to. Not to mention the absolutely useless subjects they insisted on wasting time on, like history. Sasuke would be bored to tears before the day was even over. I whined in protest. "Couldn't we just go and spar like we usually did? That was always fun." "Hush. I'm not letting you leave me all alone on the first day, and I swear, if you skip out on me when I'm not looking, I'll tell Kushina." I snapped my mouth shut. It was an empty threat, but at the same time it wasn't. Mommy wouldn't do anything. We both knew that, but I'd rather die than disappoint her, and she would be disappointed to hear that I skipped my first day. A little bit, at least. Sasuke shot me a smug look, and I resisted the urge to punch it off her face. That's what I thought. "Now come on." After several minutes of Sasuke pulling me along and me dragging my feet whenever I could, we arrived at the academy gate, still quite early for most kids. Sasuke finally let me go and looked up at the large building with an excited smile while I gingerly rubbed my wrist. "She's such a violent girl. What do you think they'll teach us first?" Sasuke asked, bouncing on her heels. "Kunai techniques? Some cool jutsu? Ooh, do you think they'll teach kenjutsu?" I just shook my head despairingly. Sasuke's expectations would soon die a vicious death, and I only hoped I wouldn't be near her when it did. The worst thing anyone could do, as far as Sasuke was concerned, was hamper her training, and there was no telling what she was liable to do if she thought someone was getting in her way. Actually, maybe I did want to be close. That sounded incredibly entertaining. "Come on, let's go find our class." Sasuke took my wrist again and pulled me forward. I winced as she grabbed the same bruised spot, but ultimately just rolled my eyes and followed obediently along. I was already familiar with the layout of the academy, so I could have taken us straight there if I wanted to. But I also didn't want to spend a second longer in that classroom than I had to. So instead I just let Sasuke wander in search of it in a vain attempt to delay our inevitable suffering. Unfortunately, the floor plan was made for idiot children to navigate, and Sasuke was anything but, so we reached our destination in a matter of moments. We obviously sat next to each other, but I had to convince her to let us sit in the back of the classroom. It was better that way, as Sasuke would soon realize. Or at least, it was until I could convince her to ditch this place with me. As the students trickled in, I was reminded that Sasuke was rather famous. I didn't really understand, since all she had done was not die when everyone else had, but either way, the people in the village were the polar opposite to me when it came to how we were treated. They all pointed excitedly when they saw her and whispered in not-so-subtle voices to their friends about her presence. Regardless of the disparity of our treatment, however, We both had the same reaction, as Sasuke only scowled at the onlookers disdainfully. Things settled down as the start of class closed in, and the instructor ordered everyone to their seats. Their usual system of ignoring my presence entirely continued from last year, so I wasn't surprised when they had elected to skip my name during roll call. What did surprise me was Sasuke immediately raising her hand to helpfully inform them that they had forgotten someone. "You didn't call on Naruto," she said. The instructor looked annoyed at the mention of me, but he put on a pleasant face when addressing Sasuke. "Yes, Uchiha-san, I see that. Thank you," he said rather curtly, and Sasuke sat back with a huff. "Even they act like this," she muttered under her breath so only I could hear. "One of these days, I'm going to figure out why everyone is so weird about you." I just gave her a little smile. Sasuke could be rude and abrasive, but there were many times when she defended me in little ways like this even when there was no reason to. It's not like I was going to complain about it, but it made me happy when she did so anyway. I wasn't used to anyone sticking up for me, so it felt nice, even if it was ultimately unnecessary. Not long after, the placement test started, and the instructor began by passing out a test to gauge everyone's knowledge. It was meant for newly admitted student, not someone sitting in for their second year. The answers were child's play, and I was sure Sasuke had done just as well. She didn't read nearly as much as I did, but she absorbed information like a sponge, and her memory was freakishly good. Really, the question wasn't how high either of us scored, but whether anyone else in the class would match up. The real fun, however, was when they brought us all out into the courtyard to spar with one another. And by fun, I meant watching as bumbling children flailed uselessly at each other until one of them was pushed out of the sparring circle or gave up in tears. An embarrassment, in other words. I couldn't help but laugh at the dismayed look on Sasuke's face as she watched them fumble around. She had grown up in one of the most famous ninja clans in all the world, and had Itachi for a big brother. Playfights for her were deathmatches for civilian children. How are they this bad? Sasuke's voice was full of disbelief. Her eyes followed as one particular boy somehow managed to trip over his own feet right as the match started and began crying from his scraped elbows. Sasuke physically winced from the sheer embarrassment of having to be in the same class as him. This has to be some sort of joke. I just shrugged. Unfortunately, this was reality. Civilian kids were a joke, and the majority of them would drop out by the end of the month. You could tell who were the children of ninja since they didn't burst into tears at the first injury, but even they were hit and miss. As relaxed as the place was during peacetime, the Leaf Academy was still a rigorous institution and the children were held to strict standards. For some, it was just too much. Clan kids were another matter. They were often used to the rigors of training under their own roofs and breezed through the academy. Of course, there were always exceptions. I supposed I was one of them. Regardless of my parentage, I didn't have the support of any clan, so technically I was just an unusually skilled civilian. And, of course, Sasuke was a clan kid through and through. As for any others in our class, I only spotted one of them. Their moon-white eyes were a dead giveaway to what family they belonged to, and it was only confirmed when the instructor called out, "Hyuga Niji." The stoic-looking boy with long brown hair stepped forward into the sparring circle. He looked around at his potential opponents and, while his face didn't show much, I could see a hint of disdain in his eyes. "Uchiha Sasuke," they called out next, and Sasuke let out a huff. "Finally," she muttered, moving to step into the ring with the Hyuga. The two made the seal of confrontation at each other, though his was rather stiff and Sasuke barely tried. "I've heard rumors that you've unlocked your Sharingan," the stiff boy said before beginning the fight. "I wonder if there is any merit to them." Sasuke just looked at him lazily. "And if there was? Then it would make for a most prestigious occasion, for two most famous dojutsu to clash," he said. He then shifted into an unusual stance that I vaguely recognized as a Hyuga-styled form. At the same time I could feel a pulse of chakra coming from him and I saw the veins around his eyes bulge. Sasuke just snorted. "That's too bad then. Because there's only one here worthy enough to face my eyes, and she sure as hell isn't you, she snarked before settling into her own stance. The boy's stoic face twisted into a scowl, and I could tell she hit a nerve. Without hesitation, he charged forward and thrust his palm towards her torso. Sasuke didn't bother to even dodge and caught his move mid-strike by the wrist. He didn't even have time to widen his eyes in surprise when Sasuke yanked him closer and delivered a brutal punch to his cheek. The boy lurched back with a cry, clutching his face in pain, and Sasuke was apparently feeling sadistic enough to back away and let him suffer instead of just ending the fight, if the twinge of a cruel smile I could see on her lips was anything to go by. Neji squirmed for a moment as he tried to relieve the pain in his cheek, but he collected himself faster than I honestly expected him to. Then again, he was a clan kid, so maybe it shouldn't have been so surprising. The expression on his face was downright hateful though, and he glared at Sasuke with fire in his eyes. Sasuke just smiled smugly at him and made a taunting motion. He charged again, but in the end, the outcome was the same. Neji seemed more skilled than the average academy student, but that was passing a low bar. However much those eyes of his allowed him to see better. What did the Byakugan do exactly? Well, whatever it did, Sasuke had trained her but off before she had ever even unlocked her Sharingan. Her goal was to rival Itachi, not an above-average academy student. Anything but total domination against these children would be an utter humiliation. The boy fought hard, but eventually Sasuke grew tired of knocking him around and ended it by unceremoniously tossing him out of the ring. There were many excited exclamations from the children watching, all of them impressed by how easily Sasuke won, but only the instructors seemed to recognize the skill involved. I saw them glancing at each other with impressed looks on their faces, and it made me want to roll my eyes. This wasn't even the least of what Sasuke could do. Another few matches went by while I shuffled boredly on my feet. Sasuke seemed to be burning her fuse as well, watching the matches with a scowl on her face and impatiently tapping her fingers on her arm. I could see that she was only growing more and more frustrated as it became clear just how pathetic the other students were. What a joke, she muttered to herself. What an absolute joke. No wonder it only took a year for him to graduate. Are we the only ones with any talent? Are the teachers this weak as well? Pathetic. To be honest, I wasn't convinced that the instructors were all that strong, either. They were ostensibly chunin. But nothing I'd seen of them convinced me I couldn't take them on if I really needed to. Or if Sasuke was helping me. Though it was possible that was just because they never had cause to show their full capabilities in the academy, so I had simply never seen it. Maybe. Eventually, they had run through nearly all the students and I was one of the few left. I was actually slightly surprised they had called on me at all, but either way I took my place in front of a scrawny-looking kid with distractingly large eyebrows. I didn't bother taking any sort of stance and let him come at me with a wild shout. Unfortunately he tripped halfway there and face-planted into the ground in front of me. I saw Sasuke slap a palm to her face out of the corner of my eye. To his credit, he didn't so much as whimper as he picked himself up back off the ground, wiping the tears from his eyes and charging back at me. Still, he was far too slow, and moving out of the way in time to shove him right out of the ring was the easiest thing in the world. I started making my way back to Sasuke's side when I noticed that the instructor watching over my match looked incredibly annoyed, and I realized he was hoping I would lose. But when he saw the person I was walking towards, his frown turned into a cruel smile. Next, Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. I paused mid-step and Sasuke blinked in my direction, and then we simultaneously broke into wide grins. It was incredibly obvious what he was trying to do. He wanted to humiliate me by pairing me up with the supposedly strongest student in the class, but he had no idea that we were about the same level. I wasn't entirely sure Sasuke understood all that, but either way she was eager to finally have a chance to let loose. She practically sprinted up to the sparring ring with me, taking her place across from me and doing some light stretches before we began as I did the same. Apparently the difference in preparation compared to our other matches didn't go unnoticed, and I could hear excited chatter coming from the crowd watching us, but I ignored it in favor of planning my strategy. Being locked in a small sparring ring mixed things up quite a bit from our usual routine. Not used to fighting in such a small area, huh? Sasuke said as she stretched her legs. This is going to be tricky. I smiled challengingly back at her. Ready? The instructor asked, looking at the two of us while subtly shooting me a glare. Sasuke's hand shot into the air. Question. The instructor looked a little surprised there was any question at all, but he gestured for her to ask away. Are we allowed to use ninjutsu? I nearly snorted. Of course she would ask that. The instructor blinked in surprise and didn't seem to know how to respond to that. It wasn't like anyone their age would be able to perform any ninjutsu anyway, or so he thought. Eventually he just said, if you know any. I suppose that would be acceptable. Sasuke gave a vicious grin, but I just rolled my eyes. The only ninjutsu she knew that would be useful right now was the fireball, and there was no way she would be able to weave the hand signs for it when we were stuck at such close range. I wouldn't give her the chance. The instructor once again asked them if they were ready, and I just nodded my head as Sasuke closed her eyes. Ready. Begin, exclaimed the instructor, and I dashed forward just as she snapped them back open. One of the first thing I had to learn when I started sparring with Sasuke was how best to counter the Sharingan. Sasuke once told me that one of the reasons Itachi was so deadly was because he could trap you in a genjutsu with even the briefest moments of eye contact. Not to mention the predictive power the eyes gave you. How could you fight an opponent who could see your every move before you even made it and end the fight the instant you so much as glanced at their face? Sasuke wasn't at that point, yet, but she was still extremely dangerous. It took her a moment to muster the concentration needed to cast a genjutsu, so she started off every battle with one to try to catch me off guard. Afterwards, she could only manage one if I was foolish enough to give her the time and space to cast one. I had lost more than one spar after doing just that. But that didn't help me with the other aspect of her eyes. At first I tried to confuse her, to move so wildly and unpredictably that she wouldn't be able to tell my next move. But it was useless, those eyes were just too good. However I moved, she saw it coming a mile away and countered just as easily as anything else. I also had a brief period where I thought to try to overpower her, to punch and kick hard enough that she'd crumble even if she could block my attacks, but I quickly threw that idea in the trash. Sasuke would just dodge then, and what use was power when you couldn't even land a blow? In the end, I realized the answer was the same as the counter to her genjutsu: speed. It wasn't just that there were some attacks that Sasuke couldn't keep up with, regardless of if she saw it coming or not. The faster I moved in general, the less she would be able to predict. Once I realized that, I focused almost entirely on moving as quickly as I could, whatever I was doing. I didn't stop to think about my strategy or what my next move would be. I just moved. I also decided to start wearing some training weights during exercises to see if they's helped me get any faster, though it meant Sasuke absolutely trounced me in the next match we had. It evened out again, though, when she saw what I was doing and decided to copy me. I had tried some other things as well, but in the end, the only thing that ever really brought any results was just moving too fast for Sasuke to keep up with. So with that in mind, I closed the distance between us as quickly as I could, avoiding looking at her face until we made contact. I heard her click her tongue in annoyance as she moved to parry my first punch. "You never fall for that anymore," she complained, and I looked back up at her with a smile. It was safer now that she had to focus on avoiding my attacks. I made sure to never let up, throwing every punch and kick I could manage while avoiding Sasuke's own. It was honestly an exhausting way of fighting, but anything less and I would lose. As focused as I was, I still heard the dismayed exclamations from the instructors refereeing our fight, and I was pretty sure I knew why. The first was obviously because Sasuke had activated her Sharingan. As far as I was aware, Sasuke was the youngest Uchiha to awaken the eyes in a long time. Even Itachi hadn't awakened them until he was a year older than she was now, and it spoke volumes about her potential. The second was because I was actually keeping up with her. More than that, in fact, at the moment I had her on the ropes, focused on blocking and dodging. I think I split my attention a little too much though, because a second later Sasuke's fist slipped past my guard and planted itself into my chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. In the next instant, she grabbed my arm and pulled me around in an attempt to throw me out of the ring, but I ground my feet into the dirt and threw a punch up at her chin. She jerked her head back in time to dodge it, but it gave me enough room to yank my arm out of her grasp. Sasuke laughed as I regained my breath and moved back in for another assault. "Don't get distracted, Naruto." My eye twitched in annoyance, but she was right. I couldn't lose focus if I wanted to win, so I ignored everyone around us in favor of pummeling Sasuke as best I could. Not that she made it easy. Trying to hit Sasuke was like trying to catch a feather blowing through the wind. The moment you made a move for it, it was already blowing away. In some ways, I had the advantage in this little ring. Sasuke didn't have much room to maneuver and made dodging me all the harder. Usually we would chase each other up and down the training ground as we fought, so this was markedly different. In practice, however, it didn't seem to make much difference at all, as even as I brought her closer to the edge of the ring, she just as easily slipped around me and away from defeat. It also didn't help that she kept managing to break past my own defenses and land a jab or two on me before I could keep her away. It didn't really hurt much, or rather, it was a pain I could easily power through. But it made keeping up with her all the more annoying. Sasuke had that usual arrogant smile on her face as she danced around me, and I could tell she expected to win this time. Of course, she usually thought that, but seeing that grin so close as we circled the same small area was starting to piss me off. Finally, when she made to land another hit on me, I managed to snag her arm with both my hands. I knew she would be expecting me to try to toss her out of the ring, so instead I pulled her down, knocking her legs out from under her. She hit the ground with a grunt and I followed up with a kick to her torso. I half expected her to dodge at the last second, but instead she grit her teeth and took the hit, using the chance to grab my leg and pull me down with her. Her foot came up at the same time, aiming for my chest, but I knocked it away with my arm and did the only thing I could do in that position and threw my head into her face as I came down. Sasuke cried out as my forehead collided with her nose. I think I heard it crack, but I was more worried about the tangled mess we'd gotten into, and I tried to use my position on top of her to pin her down, but she bucked me off before I could. I noticed her foot heading my way too late, and pain ravaged my skull as it crashed into the side of my head. I tried to shake my head free of the pain, but it only served to aggravate it further, and by the time I could think again, I realized I'd been still for far too long. I did my best not to meet her eyes as I looked up, but when I did, I saw her on her knees, hands rapidly signing in front of her. My eyes widened in surprise and panic as I realized what she was going for. It was too late to interrupt her, she was already on her last hand sign. All I could do was frantically lurch to the side as a fireball burst from her lips, hissing in pain as part of my arm was caught in the flames. As I was moving, Sasuke abruptly cancelled the fireball and leaped forward, tackling me back into the ground. We both fumbled for a moment, but Sasuke recovered first and raised her fist in the air, aiming it for my face, when all of a sudden a shrill whistle pierced the air. Sasuke paused mid-strike, blinking down at me before turning to look up and around them. I did the same, taking the chance to recover my breath, and I realized that we were both outside of the ring. In the heat of the moment, I had completely forgotten that this was supposed to be an academy spar, and I'd bet money the Sasuke did too. I wasn't entirely sure what happened, but if I had to guess, I had gotten too close to the edge when dodging the fireball and Sasuke's tackle had taken us both out of it. "Ring out," the instructor called. "Uchiha wins." "What?" Sasuke exclaimed, while I just rolled my eyes. "How is that a win? I knocked us both out." The instructor looked a little taken aback by the objection, but answered anyway. "Uzumaki hit the ground first. Therefore Uchiha wins." That was garbage and everyone knew it. Any way you looked at it, this was a tie, but the instructors cared more about making me look bad than doing their job. They were terrible ninja, honestly, but I was used to it. Sasuke looked like she wanted to argue more, but I grabbed her arm and stopped her. She looked at me with furious eyes, her tomo spinning dangerously, but I just shook my head. It wasn't worth it, and really, neither of us would have been satisfied with a ring out anyway, even if it had been legitimate. Sasuke looked livid, but in the end she only gave a frustrated growl, letting her blazing eyes fade back to their usual black as she picked herself up. She stretched out her hand to help me up, and I gladly took it, popping back up next to her and only wincing slightly at my singed arm. I could hear the instructors all praising Sasuke for her incredible performance, especially her use of the fireball jutsu, but every word they spoke just seemed to piss her off more and more. We were still holding hands, so I decided to do something before she cracked, and gently pulled her away from the spotlight and towards the back of the crowd. People still watched us, but at least this way we weren't the center of attention. Sasuke grumbled only vaguely coherently at the unfairness of it all, and I just smiled lightly and pat her cheek. This was life for me, and Sasuke would likely be seeing more of it now that we were attending the academy. Of course, Sasuke just gave me a disgruntled glare and swatted my hand away, making me giggle at her reaction. I also noticed that her nose was slightly crooked and slowly bruising, so with a mischievous smile, I reached up and cracked it back into place before she could react. Sasuke yelped, more from surprise than the pain, but the way she jumped was hilarious either way and it made me laugh aloud. "You little dash." Sasuke took a threatening step toward me, and I just smiled widely at her and backed away playfully, half prepared to bolt if she actually gave chase, but our little game was cut short when an instructor called out to them. "Uzumaki. Detention after class for harassing Uchiha. Now separate and stop bothering her. We'll be testing target practice next." I glanced over at the angry teacher and rolled my eyes. I don't know why they still bothered giving me detention when they knew I wasn't going to show up for them. Sasuke, though, once again looked livid, and opened her mouth to shout back something likely filled with more than a few expletives, but I quickly slapped my hand over her mouth and gave her a dry look. It seriously wasn't worth it. Sasuke glared at me for a long moment, but I just shook my head. Eventually, she relented, pulling away with a huff and stomping off towards the target range. The instructor shouted something else, but I had honestly stopped listening, so I just followed after Sasuke without paying him any more attention. Target practice wasn't really something you could shine at. You could only hit the bullseye so many times before it became mundane, and Sasuke and I did just that. That wasn't all we could do, of course. Sasuke knew that cool trick where she knocked her kunai off course with another kunai, but the range wasn't set up for that sort of thing, so in the end we just got through with the best score we could achieve. Well, Sasuke did. Who knows what they did with my score? When all was said and done, by the time we got back to the classroom to receive our evaluation, Sasuke was pent up with mounting frustration. I was doing my best to calm her down, but really, there was precious little anyone could do once she got worked up, and between our interrupted scuffle and the constant annoyances that were the students and staff, Sasuke was very worked up. With the physical exams done with, all that was left was to see how well we'd done on the written exam, but when they had passed out our papers, Sasuke was fuming. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, clutching both our tests in hand as she compared them. Mine was marked with a glaring red 0, which was very strange considering that Sasuke had gotten full marks with the exact same answers. I could only shrug in response. The staff had gotten incredibly lazy with their sabotage of me. I'd say I was surprised no one had gotten fired over it if it wasn't for the fact that the people in charge hated me just as much. It's not like it mattered either way, even if I wanted to learn, there was nothing taught here that I didn't already know. "How can you be so blasé about this?" Sasuke demanded to know. "These people are intentionally trying to fail you. They're supposed to be ninja and they're treating you just like everyone else does. How do you not hate it?" I only gave her a long stare. If I hated every person that had ever done me wrong, I'd hate everyone in the village by now. Well, actually. I did hate most of them, but I wasn't going to waste my time and emotional energy worrying about it. I had better things to do. Sasuke scoffed at me. I'd never let anybody walk over me like that. I'd kick their ass if they tried. I couldn't help but laugh a little. It was wildly naive of her, but also a little cute how she thought all her problems could be solved through violence. Sasuke could probably murder someone in broad daylight with only a slap on the wrist and a promise not to do it again, but if I so much as knocked over a mailbox, there would be scores of people demanding my execution. And with my status as a Jinchuriki, I didn't think I was strong enough to survive as missing Nin. Not yet. Unfortunately, there was still one last insult the staff had to throw at me, or rather us, seeing as Sasuke seemed to take so much offense on my behalf. The class rankings were revealed and Sasuke was right at the top just as expected, but I, just like last year, was sat at the very bottom. What? Sasuke stood from her desk and slammed her hands on the table. Naruto is the only one here who can even slightly keep up with me. How is she at the bottom? The teachers looked rather taken aback by her outburst and struggled to respond for a moment. Uchiha-san, I assure you that the scoring is correct. Uzumaki lost to you during your spar and she was caught cheating during the written exam. Sasuke just stared at that, mouth falling open at the sheer audacity on display. I sighed at the scene she was causing and tried to pull her back into her seat for her own sake, but Sasuke only shook her arm free of my grasp. No, Naruto. I'm not going to dash, she cut herself off with a frustrated growl, alternating between glaring up at the teachers and down at me. You know what? If you're not going to stand up for yourself, then I'll just go to someone who will. Without further warning, she scooped up our exam papers and rushed out of the room, ignoring the teachers calling after her. Absolutely baffled, but also figuring that they would somehow find a way to blame me, I quickly shot off after her and we were out of the academy in moments. I followed as Sasuke jumped from rooftop to rooftop, wondering where she was going, but it didn't take long for me to notice we were heading in the direction of my house. Butterflies started fluttering in my stomach at the realization that we were going to see Mommy, and I sped up until I was running right alongside Sasuke. I looked at her, still wondering just what she was hoping for, but more eager to go along, regardless. Sasuke only gave me a short glare before ignoring me and continuing to run. I didn't think she was mad at me, really, more mad for me. Maybe? I don't know. She was weird. Either way, it didn't take long at all for us to reach home, and Sasuke proceeded to bust right through the door and shout, "Kushina. Oh, there you are." It was anyone's guess where Mommy would be at any given time of day, so I don't think Sasuke actually expected her to be there in the living room when she barged in. By there I meant passed out on the couch, but still. She jolted awake, looking at us with bleary-eyed confusion as I made a beeline straight for her. Mommy gave a small grunt as I crashed into her at full speed, but she still wrapped me in a hug and I happily buried my face into her chest as she looked between the two of us. "And Naruto? Sasuke? What are you doing here? Is class over already?" "Never mind that." Sasuke stomped over and presented the 2 papers she had taken to Mommy. "Look at this." Mommy took them and looked them over, still looking confused. "What is this? A test? Oh, Naruto, how did you get, hold on." She went silent, eyes flitting back and forth between the 2 pages. "They're deliberately undermining her," came Sasuke's heated voice. "We both got perfect scores, but somehow she was cheating and I wasn't. And during our sparring match I accidentally knocked both of us out of the ring, yet Naruto lost while I won when it clearly should have been a tie." Wrapped as tightly around her as I was, I could feel as Mommy tensed up. "They're sabotaging my baby?" I heard her whisper to herself. She looked down at me with a look of dawning realization on her face. Is this why you got held back? Did you teachers deliberately fail your final exam last year?" I look away, saying nothing. Mommy grit her teeth in frustration. Why didn't you tell me?" She sounded so desperate, and I couldn't help the feeling of shame that built up inside of me. It was just the sort of thing I had come to expect from people, and I hadn't thought it was a big deal. I didn't want to bother her with something I thought was so trivial. "Wait, what?" Sasuke asked. "What do you mean last year? Has Naruto been to the academy before?" "Yes, you didn't know? She attended last year." I thought it was strange. You're much too smart to be held back, but you didn't say anything, so I just. Mommy sighed in frustration, standing up and pulling from me even as I tried to keep hold of her. I whined as she escaped my grasp, but I didn't try to follow her. You got held back?" Sasuke looked at me, angry and bewildered, and I shrunk back into the couch. "You're the second strongest person I know. You should be a ninja already. How could you let yourself get held back?" I looked down at my feet, feeling my cheeks burn. I guess I could have tried a little harder to get some help. It just, all seemed so pointless at the time. "They're sabotaging my baby," Mummy growled, pacing the room while glaring down at the exam sheets. I should have known this would happen. Those no good, worthless, absolute pieces of arg. Sasuke and I both jumped in surprise as Mommy slammed her fist down onto the wooden coffee table with a shout, completely shattering it. I stared at the wreckage, a little awed despite myself. Her heavy chakra pulsated wildly as she raged, and her hair surreally began to rise up all around her. "I won't stand for this. No one goes against my family and gets away with it." Mommy fumed for a moment before suddenly storming out to the house. Sasuke and I could only shoot each other puzzled glances before chasing after her. She moved like a woman on a mission, and it was a struggle just to keep up with her as we raced across the rooftops. Sasuke asked where we were going several times, but Mommy either didn't hear or was too angry to answer, but it soon became clear either way as the looming figure of the Hokage's mansion approached. I had no idea what Mommy was planning to do, but whatever it was would certainly be the talk of the town, as rather than going in through the front, Mommy elected to crash right into the Hokage's office through the window. He had apparently been in some kind of meeting with two jonin, as I discovered when I jumped in with Sasuke after Mommy. She didn't seem to care about that at all, however, as she unceremoniously slammed the two papers down on the table. "Explain this." Now, Mommy's voice was low and dangerous, more intense than I had ever heard it, and her hair was still raised strangely, swaying threateningly around her in what I noticed were 9 distinct strands. Whatever activity going on in the room had halted, and everyone was shock silent. The Hokage looked up at Mommy without saying a word, giving his pipe a few puffs before saying, "Leave us. You can send in your reports later." The two jonin glanced at each other but didn't say anything and merely bowed before vacating the room. I had never been inside the Hokage's office before, and I wasn't sure whether to be surprised by how sparse it was. The only decoration was a potted plant in the corner of the room and the portraits of the previous Hokage. Mommy didn't keep pictures of Minato around the house. She had never told me why, but given the way she flinched nearly every time she saw my face, I could guess. I obviously had some idea of what he looked like. It would be hard not to with his face carved into the mountain overlooking the village, but I had never actually seen a clear photo of him before, and now I think I understood a little more just why she had that reaction. It was uncanny, really. We had the same long blonde hair, the same bright blue eyes. Our faces were structured similarly too, though I certainly had a decent amount of baby fat that I needed to grow out of. I was right on the path of looking just like a female version of him once I was older. It was no wonder I reminded Mommy so much of him. I wasn't the only one who noticed the portrait either. Sasuke had seen me staring, and her eyes widened as she followed my gaze. She alternated between staring at me and the portrait, her eyes slowly narrowing in suspicion before she finally settled on staring at Mommy in befuddled amazement. It was a little amusing actually, watching her connect the dots in her head and coming to the realization the Mommy had once been with the fourth Hokage. I suppose I wouldn't have believed it either, if I hadn't figured it out on my own. Finally, the Hokage spoke up. What exactly is the issue here, Kushina? He asked calmly. The issue is that those cretins at that academy of yours have been sabotaging my daughter. Look at this. Mommy shoved the exam papers in front of the Hokage's face, showing the disparity between mine and Sasuke's scores. The Hokage took them and looked them over. Is it possible she may have cheated? Mommy's eyes narrowed dangerously, and the Hokage's desk cracked under the pressure she was putting it under. My daughter is not a cheater. The Hokage just stared at her for a moment, his eyes briefly looking over me and Sasuke, silently puffing on his pipe. Eventually, he just sighed. Kushina. I'm sure you're aware I regularly receive reports from the academy. Of course I'm aware, Mommy snarled back. So tell me why you haven't done anything about this disgrace. My baby was held back because of this negligence. But the Hokage only shook his head. I've been keeping an eye on Naruto's progress in the academy, Kushina, and I'm afraid there's little to speak of. Nearly all the reports mention Naruto as a substandard student who pays little attention to the lectures and frequently disrupts the class. Not to mention the myriad of unexcused absences. I know this isn't something you want to hear as her mother, but Naruto's performance both academically and socially has been extremely lackluster. But that's bull. Both Mommy and the Hokage paused, looking over at Sasuke, who paled slightly under the sudden weight of their gaze, but continued on regardless. Naruto is as strong as I am, and she works harder than anyone else I know. And those teachers are hacks. They gave her a loss in our spar when we should have tied, they failed her exam when we both knew all the answers, and they gave her a detention for harassing me when we were just playing around. And how could she be a disturbance? She's freaking mute. The Hokage stared down at Sasuke and I for a moment, but I didn't have the slightest idea what he was thinking. His face was utterly inscrutable. And the absences? How do you explain those? Sasuke floundered for a moment, and I didn't blame her. That wasn't as easy to explain, and when she glanced my way for answers, I could only shrug my shoulder. She'd seen for herself what the academy was like. However delinquent it made me, there were more reasons not to go than otherwise. Why wouldn't she skip? Sasuke said instead, turning back to the Hokage. With how badly she's treated there, we could learn more on our own than we ever would at the academy. Those reports you've been getting have obviously been falsified, old man, Mommy added scathingly. Why wouldn't they be? You know how this village treats us. Or have you gone too senile to have even considered that? The Hokage remained as impassive as ever in the face of Mommy's ire. It was somewhat impressive, if I was being honest. I had never seen her so angry before, it was a little bit intimidating. But it also made my heart flutter, knowing that it was on my behalf. In the end, the Hokage just sighed. Very well. I'll have someone I trust investigate the matter. If any wrongdoing is found, I'll have the culprits arrested and suitable replacements found. But Mommy wasn't satisfied with that at all. Arrested? I want those bastards executed, Hiruzen. Mommy's chakra pulsed with anger, and I nearly flinched at the intensity of it. More than anything, though, I was surprised just how heated Mommy was. Execution seemed like a bit much for some prejudiced teachers, but even then, if Mommy wanted it, I'd gladly do the deed myself. This time, however, the Hokage didn't remain expressionless, though the only noticeable change was his narrowed eyes. That's not the sort of thing to say lightly, Kushina. The culprits, if any, will be handled appropriately. Of that you have my word. Mommy snorted derisively. They better be. Keep them locked up tight, Hiruzen. Because if I catch sight of anyone who's harmed my daughter in any way, I will handle them myself. The two of them glared at each other. Neither backing down as Sasuke and I could only stare in awe. I don't think either of us thought there was anyone in the village who would stand up to the Hokage, much less blatantly disrespect him like this, but apparently Mommy of all people could. And even more surprising, it wasn't Mommy who relented first. Fine, the Hokage said. But I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences should it come to that. Mommy scoffed at that. Your pathetic little council can bluster all they want. It won't change a thing, she said, but apparently she was satisfied with that, as she pulled away from the Hokage's desk, her fluttering hair finally settling down. She began to turn away from the Hokage but paused when she saw Sasuke and I staring at her. Sasuke was staring incredulously, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, and I was smiling deliriously up at her. Was there anything else, Kushina? The Hokage asked as he saw her hesitate. There is, in fact, she said, turning back towards him. Your little investigation is all well and good, but there's no reason for Naruto and Sasuke to attend the academy in the first place. Sasuke's as much a genius as her brother is, and Naruto is, well, Naruto. I've seen them fight, they're better than most genin. There's little the academy can do for them. The Hokage glanced over at Sasuke when her brother was mentioned, but he just puffed on his pipe for a moment before responding. And what of it? He asked lightly. Mommy just gave him an annoyed look. You know. Well, what? They're stagnating here. Let them graduate early and get some actual experience out in the world. My eyes widened as shock shot through my body at the implications of what Mommy was asking for, and Sasuke had a similar expression. I hadn't been expecting to do actual ninja things for years at the least, but suddenly the possibility of doing so very soon was staring me in the face. The Hokage let out a long-suffering sigh. Kushina, you know very well why I disallowed early graduates. Perhaps things would be different during wartime, but for now, it's best to let children be children. Mommy stared at him incredulously. If that was supposed to be a joke, it was in extremely poor taste. Neither of them are children, not really. And you've deluded yourself if you think otherwise. Keeping them cooped up here in the village where they're ostracized won't do them any good. The Hokage didn't answer immediately, looking down at me and Sasuke, giving us long, searching looks. Sasuke was practically bouncing on her heels in anticipation, but to be honest, I wasn't sure how to react. Becoming a full-fledged ninja would be incredibly useful, for a variety of reasons, but I didn't know if I could handle being away from Mommy on missions. How about this? The Hokage said eventually. I'll make you a deal. Allow them to attend another year. I'll have a reliable member on staff, and if they manage to pass, then I'll allow them to graduate. Mommy gave him a cautious look. And in return? You return to active duty as a Jonin sensei. Mommy stepped back in shock, looking like she had just been slapped. What? Now that Minato is gone, you're the strongest ninja left in the leaf, he continued, and I heard Sasuke choke on air, not that I was doing any better. I knew, intellectually at least, that Mommy was strong, but to hear she was the strongest, from the Hokage himself? That may have been the most shocking thing to learn so far. I've taken you off the roster to give you time to recover and raise Naruto, but the leaf will never be at full strength without you. It's past time you pass on your skills to the next generation. But Mommy stammered. But I don't know the first thing about teaching, Databane. I blinked, then blinked a second time and ran that last bit through my head again. I also looked over at Sasuke just to confirm that, no, I didn't just hallucinate it, and she was wearing the same expression as I was. Gods, I loved this cutie so much. How was I this lucky to be her daughter? Then you can learn, the Hokage said simply. You're too valuable of an asset to be sitting on the sidelines. Kushina. If you can raise even a single student to your level, it will be a massive boon to the leaf. But who would I even teach? Most of my techniques are Uzumaki specialties. That's not something you can just pass down. The Hokage just raised a brow and pointed with his pipe. I'd say you have the perfect candidate right there. Mommy turned and saw me standing right there, and the Hokage brought his pipe back to his lips. I dare say young Sasuke wouldn't mind being trained by such a capable kunoichi, either, he added. Wait. Wait. Mommy would be my Jonin sensei? That solved everything. I could go out on missions, train to be even stronger, and I'd do it all with Mommy. I might actually get to spend even more time with her. It was perfect. Even Mommy seemed to be thinking about it, for she didn't immediately object this time. Instead, she just looked at me uncertainly, and I knew she was thinking those useless thoughts she always had. But I wasn't going to let this chance go. I stepped up close to her and grabbed her hand, smiling widely up at her as I did my best to convey my excitement for that idea. I don't know why, but whatever she saw on my face made her flinch with a look of guilt and avert her eyes. She didn't let go of my hand, though. All right, Mommy said hesitantly, turning back to the Hokage. If it's these two, I think I can do it. Good. I'll keep you off the roster until they graduate, then. That'll give you time to prepare, the Hokage said, but I think everyone in the room understood what he really meant. She needed time to sober up. I wondered if she would be able to. Now, if that's all, I have paperwork to get back to, the Hokage said, in what was clearly a dismissal, though there were indeed mountains of paperwork sitting on his desk. Mommy only nodded, still a little dazed, and made to leave back out the window, pulling me along with her with Sasuke following behind. No sooner than we had hopped out of the office and onto the nearest roof when Sasuke let loose the barrage of questions that she had apparently been holding in. What the? Was all that? Mommy looked at her sharply. Sasuke-chan. Language, she scolded. I didn't even know you were a ninja. Sasuke said, ignoring the rebuke. Why was the Hokage talking about you like you're even stronger than him? Mommy looked a little embarrassed, reaching up to rub the back of her head. 'Cause I am? Sasuke just gaped at her. But you're you. Mommy frowned. What's that supposed to mean? You know what it means. And that's not all, she pointed straight at me. Her dad is the fourth Hokage. Mommy choked. What? And no, he isn't, she retorted in the least convincing tone possible. Like hell he's not. Sasuke shot back. She looks just like him in the portrait. And it explains why she's so strong. She shifted her finger to point at Mommy. You banged the fourth Hokage. Mommy spluttered incoherently as she tried and failed to find an adequate reply. Where did you learn that word? She asked instead. I couldn't help but laugh at the whole situation. I was already so happy from learning that Mommy would be my Jonin sensei, and now she was acting so cutely embarrassed under Sasuke's interrogation. It was really too much for me, so I latched on to Mommy's arm and held it tight, rubbing my face on her sleeve. Sasuke pointed back at me. Did you know? She demanded, and I just smiled at her. You did. Why didn't you tell me? What? Mommy exclaimed this time, looking down at me. What do you mean you knew? I never told you. I blink up at her. I didn't need her to tell me, it was kind of obvious. Well, it should have been, at any rate. I knew it. Sasuke said, and Mommy flinched as she realized she just let the truth slip. How does nobody know this? She should be the most famous person in the village, but instead she's the most hated. Why? It doesn't make any sense. Mommy let out a sigh of resignation. She took a step towards Sasuke and knelt down on her knees. She tried to put her hands on her shoulders, but given that I refused to release my grip, she settled for just one. Listen, Sasuke. You absolutely are not allowed to tell anyone about this, she said seriously. But why? If people know who she is, then maybe they'll stop treating her so awfully. But Mommy just shook her head. No, Sasuke, listen to me. No one must know. If word gets out about her parentage, then it will paint an immediate target on her back. Mina she choked on his name, but she grit her teeth and continued on. The fourth Hokage might be the most notorious man in the last decade. He's only ninja in recorded history to receive a flea on-sight order. If people knew that Naruto was his daughter, she would be targeted by every ninja village in the elemental nations. Either to kill her or to capture her for themselves. That cannot happen. Oh, Sasuke said, a little more subduedly, looking over at me. It wasn't just that, of course. The Jinchuriki were often considered a village's most valuable military asset. Everyone knew that the leaf housed the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, but if they found out that person was also the fourth Hokage's child? I didn't want to sound conceited, but I was willing to bet that the knowledge might start another great war. Either way, it seemed Sasuke understood the weight of the situation. Fine. I won't tell anyone, she said, a little sullenly. If I had to guess, I'd say she'd wanted to brag that she was as strong as the fourth's daughter. Good, Mommy said with a smile, and then she pulled Sasuke in for a hug. Sasuke squawked as she was pulled in, and I giggled and squeezed myself in as well, turning it into a three-way hug. Sasuke squirmed the whole time, but she couldn't escape until Mommy deliberately let her go. She gave Sasuke a kiss on the forehead, drawing another displeased sound from her, then did the same to me, which I happily accepted. All right, she said, standing back up. Now that's all over and done with, what do you say we all go to Ichiraku's, she offered. My eyes widened in surprise and excitement. Ichiraku's? I couldn't remember the last time I went there with Mommy. I had no idea what had brought on this chipper mood of hers, but I was going to take advantage of every moment. Ichiraku's? Sasuke whined. Naruto drags me there every week. Can't we go somewhere else? I'm sick of it. Mommy and I both gave her scandalized looks. You can't be sick of Ichiraku's. Sasuke looked like she very much wanted to object, but I didn't give her the chance, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her off in the direction of the ramen shop. For once, Mommy and I seemed to be on the same page, and she took Sasuke's other arm, preventing her from doing anything more than struggle. You obviously haven't fully grasped the deliciousness of Ichiraku's ramen, Tebane. Don't worry, Sasuke-chan, we'll make sure you properly understand. No. Let me go. Sasuke cried, but we both ignored her, and I think I laughed the whole way there. This was turning out to be one of the best days of my life, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The end.